Welcome to the Wicked Psychology Hangout live stream. Glad to see everyone again. We are going to be continuing the Travis Reinking trial. A quick overview is that Travis walked into a Waffle House and shot 8 people, killing 4, and he shot 30 rounds, 15 in and 15 out of the Waffle House, and he had 60 more in his jacket. Thankfully, there was a gentleman that we saw yesterday testify that he was the one that tackled him and got him out of the Waffle House to not shoot off those other 60 rounds he had in his jacket, which is absolutely insane to think how much more damage and tragedy he was trying to cause at this Waffle House. Today we're going to start off by continuing with the investigator that we've previously seen explain the crime scene. She's going to come back on the stand and explain a little bit more about the crime scene and the moment that Travis arrived at the Waffle House and then began his mayhem. So let's get started with that investigator first, and then after that we'll watch another survivor's testimony.
Investigator Connor, the last time that you were on the witness stand, we left off with, I believe, the last of the photos of the interior as well as your collection of the firearm in this case. I want to ask that you be passed 2 documents. These are just Do you recognize the documents that were just handed to you?
Yes, I do.
And what are those?
They are diagrams of the exterior and interior scenes of the Waffle House.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask that both diagrams with diagram of the exterior being marked 17A and the diagram of the interior be marked 17B. And if I may have permission to publish them digitally?
You might.
Sorry. Thank you, Steve. And Officer Connor, this digital rendering is a little bit blurred. The printed version, the words are very clear, but can you just generally describe what is shown in this crime scene diagram?
So the diagram viewed here on the screen is that of the exterior scene. The little yellow numbered placards are the ones we had viewed earlier in the Faro scan, and the pictures representing the evidence that we had collected. One in the circle off to the left is pointing towards where the jacket was found across the street. Up here we had one of the victims, victim 2, which was Joe Perez, and the little marker, the yellow one, is the hat that we had collected. The pink square over here was where victim Mr. Sanderlin had been located, and then the remaining yellow markers are those of the cartridge casings that we had collected around the vehicle. This here is that vehicle I'm talking about, the pickup truck that had been seen in the photographs.
And the vehicles that are in the parking lot, are they listed with their license plate numbers?
Yes, they are.
And so that's 15 casings that were collected from the exterior of that building, is that correct?
Correct, 15.
And then moving to 17B, can you describe what is shown here?
This will be a diagram of the interior scene. Over here is the entrance door that we had viewed. The second entrance door goes this way into the actual restaurant. And then again, the little yellow squares with the numbers are those evidence markers that we viewed in the Faro and the photos from the interior. We have the weapon behind the counter. And then over here where Mr. Da Silva and I believe Miss Wagner have been located, 37, 35 were the shoe and the clothing. This area here is that hallway with the bathrooms where Mr. Shaw had been located. And then 34 here was the magazine. This number here was that little tiny lead fragment. And then all the remaining squares around the booths are where 15 cartridge casings had also been located inside the business.
And those cartridge casings, the location of them, based off of this scene and what you viewed in the video, is it indicative of anything from where the gun is actually being fired?
Generally, where we find the casings and mark them as evidence is close to where they originally were, but not necessarily always exactly where they were. When the casings hit the ground, sometimes they bounce or roll depending on the surface of the ground. They can also, in like the exterior scene, there were a lot of cars coming in and out between people leaving the scene or driving through to originally come to the Waffle House, or medical and police coming, so they can be moved by vehicles. Here in the interior, they could have been kicked in some of the rush of people moving in and out after they had originally come to rest.
And because at the point that you're processing the scene, they've had emergency personnel moving victims in and out and things of that nature. Is that correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Can you take that down? Thank you. Investigator Connor, I want to go back to the Pharaoh scan if we can. Thank you. And going back specifically to scan 9, which you have previously described, can you describe what, if anything, happened with the suspect's vehicle, the beige Chevy pickup truck? I know that you, I think previously yesterday, were describing that there was something that had to occur before you could actually enter the scene to process the scene at all.
Right. So when we arrived initially, other units were also arriving to the scene, one being bomb squad. So part of the concern when we were out there and viewed the video was he arrived in the pickup truck but fled on foot. So why didn't he leave in that truck that he arrived in? So part of the concern for our department was, could it have contained any explosive devices? So bomb squad had to come out before we could process the scene, and they had to clear the vehicle. That's why in the photos and the Pharaoh scans, the doors are open when we started our processing.
And at some point, was that vehicle processed?
It was, yes.
And I am navigating to what is listed as suspect vehicle, and there are a series of photos within the Pharaoh scan, the first one being IMG 0290, which is previously introduced Exhibit 5II. Can you describe what is shown here?
So this is a view of into the driver door here. There appeared to be a blanket or two on the driver's seat, and that is how we viewed it after bomb squad had cleared the vehicle.
The next image is IMG 0308. It is previously introduced Exhibit 5JJ. Could you describe what's shown here?
So this is a closer up photo into the driver's compartment. There was a gray, black, I think it had possibly like a White Sox print on that black side. And then there were items around the center console area. Specifically, there were some checks right here. One containing a local address for the suspect. I don't remember that address, but I do remember that it appeared to be a paycheck to him with an address on it.
And the next image is 0299 in the Pharaoh, which is previously introduced Exhibit 5KK. Can you describe what's shown here?
So this is into the front passenger side of the vehicle. The glove box was opened by bomb squad, and we searched that as well. He appeared to have some sort of construction or maintenance type articles and tools in his truck. And then some duct tape down on the lower floorboard and some paperwork.
And this photograph that you took actually kind of gives a vantage point of someone standing on the passenger side of that pickup truck and kind of how much of the interior of the Waffle House that they would be able to see. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the next image, which is IMG 0301 and previously introduced Exhibit 5LL, can you describe what's shown here?
Yeah, this is the front passenger floorboard and the articles on that, including some paperwork and a receipt.
And the next image is IMG 0300 and previously introduced Exhibit 5MM. Could you describe what's shown here?
This photograph is showing into the glove box. It contained obviously some gum and paperwork. I believe there's a little glare here, but I believe that's a knife that was in there. And then on the floor, you had the roll of duct tape, and this was an iPod that had been collected.
And the next image in the Pharaoh is labeled 0302. It is previously introduced Exhibit 5NN. Could you please describe what is shown here?
This is showing through the vehicle from the passenger side to the driver's side. Again, we can see a little closer those checks on that center console that I had previously mentioned.
And the last image, which is in the Pharaoh 0034 and previously introduced Exhibit 500. Could you describe what is shown here?
Those are those checks off that center console. Again, this is what we had seen as a possible local address for the individual.
Which, Judge, if I can have a moment, I would like to return Exhibit 4 and Exhibit 5 to the clerk. Investigator Connor, you've previously testified that you viewed the surveillance video prior to processing that scene.
That's correct. It was the first thing I did when I arrived.
And Your Honor, at this time I would ask permission to publish what has already been introduced as Exhibit 3, video file number 5.
I'm going to pause here just for 1 second and give a warning that in the next couple minutes they are going to show Travis get out of this truck, and while it is blurred, they do show the start of his attack. So just a fair warning for everybody. Also, this moment is interesting to take note of and reflect on the testimony we previously heard about this moment, about him pulling in and other survivors walking past his truck. And they testified on the way Travis stared them down as they walked into the Waffle House and how eerie they felt, and the comments they made about that would be someone that would shoot up a place like this.
Investigator Connor, I don't have any other questions. Okay.
Good morning, Investigator Connor.
Hello.
Just very quickly, you talked about processing the truck itself.
Mm-hmm.
You recall being shown, I believe it was photographic exhibits 5KK and 5NN, which were the interior of the truck
Okay.
from the vantage point of the passenger side.
Okay.
When you processed the truck, the keys to the truck were actually in the ignition. Is that correct?
I don't recall.
Do you have a physical copy of 5NN? Okay. All right. Thank you. If the clerk could provide me with Exhibit 5KK and 5NN, please. Thank you, and I'll need to use the document projector.
Yes, it appears they were still in the ignition.
All right. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. And I can produce these photographs back to the court. Those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Here we go.
Thank you, Mr.
All right, that wraps up this investigator's second part of her testimony. Little Peppa, how are you doing? Chrissy R, what's good? How are you? Yes, that was super intense, and I almost feel like it being silent, honestly, added to the intensity of what's going to happen at any moment. It's so sad seeing the moment he came out and, reflecting back on that testimony that I've mentioned that we've heard of people walking in and feeling this creepy feeling from this truck. And, this truck is parked in a handicapped spot, but also not really parked properly at all. He's between two spots. So it's already like, you're already eyeing this truck up right when you walk in. There's also been testimony that his windows were overly tinted, which made it extra creepy for people and just feeling very off as they walked by. Everyone had to walk by this truck as they entered. It was right at the entrance pretty much. So that's also a statement in itself, right? Like parking right in the front where people have to experience you in your presence before truly experiencing the horror that he was about to inflict on them.
Would you please state your name for the jury?
Kyla Shaw.
And can you spell your name for the court reporter?
KAYLASHAW.
Ms. Shaw, if you'll take off your mask while you're testifying so that everybody can clearly hear you. Thank you.
Ms. Shaw, in April of 2018, how old were you?
I was 20 at the time.
All right. Where were you working?
I was working at Kirkland's Furniture Store.
All right. And what city was that in?
That was in Jackson, Tennessee.
All right. Were you living in Jackson at the time?
I was not. I am a resident of Brownsville, Tennessee.
Brownsville, Tennessee. How far from Jackson is Brownsville?
About 25 minutes if you drive the speed limit.
Okay. So what? What were you doing in Nashville that week, the weekend of April 21st, 22nd?
It was a celebratory weekend. My cousin's birthday was that weekend, and me and my other two cousins went down to celebrate.
All right. So who did you come from Brownsville with?
Chelsea Owens and Alexis Peoples.
All right. All right. On the night of April 21st, where were y'all and what were you doing?
We had went to a lounge and we were just enjoying each other's company.
All right. Early in the morning on Sunday, April 22nd, where were you going and how did you end up at the Waffle House?
Well, we had, like I said, we were leaving a lounge and wanted to get something to eat. Unfortunately, Waffle House was the only thing open, and Chelsea and Alexis wanted that. So we went there, and we went in and ordered our food. Well, they ordered their food, and we went back to the car that I drove there. I bagged it up in the second row of parking spaces, and we waited. Then I went in to get their food.
All right. You didn't have any notification that the food was ready. You just waited in the car for a few minutes and then went in when you thought, okay, probably the food's about ready.
Right, approximately about 10 minutes we waited in the car. And I went back in because I have the stronger feet and we all had on heels. They didn't want to get back out of the car.
So they stayed in the car and you walked in by yourself.
Yes.
When you walked in, what did you do?
I sat at the bar area and I just stood around for a moment because I figured it wasn't ready just yet. Plus, they were very busy.
All right. As you sat at the bar, did you talk to anybody?
I didn't. I was observing my surroundings. I did notice Tia and Mr. Da Silva in the window. I thought it was sweet how they interacted with each other, actually. I noticed how he was just about ordering her food for her. Thought that was sweet.
All right. And then tell us what happened, how this all started with regards to the shooting.
Well, like I said, I was standing there, sitting and standing, a bit of both, at the time, waiting for their food. And all of a sudden, and I do mean sudden, there was a loud pop over my left shoulder. There was I felt something on my face. I didn't know at the time it was debris, it was glass. But in a split second, I wanted to turn over my left shoulder actually and curse some people out because I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know where this force was coming from on the side of my face. But instead, I made the decision to just fall to my side. And then I continued to hear what I know now was gunshots ring out. And I heard the cook behind the counter say to take cover, someone was shooting.
All right, so when you went down on the ground, did you just go down in the middle of the floor?
No, I did not. I fell away from the impact, so I fell to my right side, and I fell on my shoulder.
All right, and you had been seated at some of the chairs right there at the counter.
Correct.
Folks that order and actually eat at the counter, or if you're just sitting there waiting for your food for takeout, right?
Right, the bar area.
All right, so in relation to where the chair was and the counter, where did you fall?
In a very small and uncomfortable slot. I had to slide under the bar, and if you've sat at a Waffle House, you know that the bar stools do not move. So I had to slide around the chair cushion and in between the bar area. So I actually hit quite a bit of things on the way down, but yeah, I fell in that area.
All right, so you did not fall into the area where people walk. You were between the stools and the solid partition that was what the counter sits on.
Correct.
But then under the counter as well.
Right.
All right. All right. When you heard those other shots, what did you do?
I made the decision to lie still and breathless. I decided to play dead because I figured that was my only chances. Where am I gonna go? I have nowhere to hide. I'm exposed. I played dead.
All right. Did you ever look up?
Unfortunately, a moment I did glance up. I seen Mr. Reinking's puny scrotum in that moment because unfortunately he was unclothed, just a jacket.
But you could not see his face at that point.
No.
Right. All right. And Then after you peeked up, did you then go back to keeping your eyes closed and laying still?
I did. I was very still after that.
All right. Did you hear more shots at that point?
I did not.
Okay. What was the next thing you heard?
I heard rustling. I heard furniture moving. That's what I would say. And then a dead silence. Still.
All right. When you heard the wrestling, you had your eyes closed. Is that correct?
I did.
So that's why you didn't see what was happening when the fight was going on.
Correct. I did not.
All right. All right. How long did you lay there still, to the best of your recollection?
It had to be about, I don't know, 45, 30 seconds.
All right. At some point you got up. Why did you get up?
I got up because I heard people moving. I heard people behind the counter moving, and I thought I had to take my chance to take cover. I did not know where the shooter was at the time.
All right. So when you got up, what did you do?
I got up and I ran around the counter to where the workers work. And as I was running around the counter, I unfortunately slipped in Mr. DeSilva's blood. Right where I fell is where Shatia was sitting, and I was face to face with her dismembered leg.
All right. Could you tell that her leg was dismembered at that point?
Most definitely.
All right.
Most definitely.
What did you do then?
Honestly, in a moment of shock, I ran to my faith. I prayed over Shatia's leg, and I tried to save myself, and I got out of there.
All right. When you ran out of the Waffle House, did you see Mr. Reinking at that point?
While I was running out of the Waffle House, no.
All right. And were you able to see James Shaw at that point?
No.
All right. Now, you're Kayla Shaw, he's James Shaw. Are y'all any relation at all?
None at all, but now he is my honorary cousin.
Okay, good. But you did not know him that night, did you? All right.
Not at all.
All right. When you ran out, you didn't see Mr. Reinking or Mr. Shaw. Where did you go when you ran outside?
I went directly to the Nissan Sentra I had, bagged into the second row. I got into the driver's seat, and I drove off.
Okay. And were Chelsea Owens and Alexis Peebles, were they in the car still?
They were.
All right. Where did you go when you drove off?
I went down the street, so that was headed towards the Thorns gas station that was right there. I made a right, and I went down that road, and I ended up stopping at a Shell station. That's where the dispatcher instructed us to stop and wait for a police officer.
Okay. Who was on the phone with 911?
At the time, both Chelsea and Alexis were on the phone with two different dispatchers.
All right. Did you wait there until the police came?
We did.
As you were driving between the Waffle House and the gas station where you stopped, did you see anybody along the side of the road?
Yes, actually, I seen Mr. Reinking running.
All right. How crowded was the road between the Waffle House and the gas station?
Not very. Like it was, as y'all know, it was like 4 o'clock in the morning. Very minimal cars, probably like 3 max.
Okay. All right. What injuries did you sustain?
Scratches, lacerations to my face from the debris of the glass. I suffered a minor shoulder injury. I had a sling for about 2 weeks, bruises, discomfort.
Okay. From the gas station, were you transported to Southern Hills?
Yes, Chelsea actually drove me to Southern Hills.
And that's where you were treated and released that night?
Yes.
Okay.
Also, that's where I met James that night.
Okay. All right. We've got a previously introduced Exhibit 3, and we'd like to go to video 4. All right, Ms. Shaw, do you see, oh, it's not up yet. Okay, do you see your car in this picture before we even start the video?
Yes, I do.
If you would just kind of touch the screen where your car is, right there. Okay. All right, I think we can take that. Can we?
Unit menu, and then clear.
Okay, great. And we're going to go ahead and start this video, and if you could just narrate it for us and explain where you are and what you're doing.
I'm getting out of the car at this point, approaching the Waffle House, about to see if the food is ready. I never noticed that he was pulling up right as I was walking in. I'm going into the Waffle House, standing around waiting on service. Well, not actually waiting on service because, like I said, we had already ordered, but giving them time because they were busy. Checking out the scene. As I said, they were busy, so I was just standing around, giving them time. Notice Mr. Da Silva and Tia. As I said, I thought it was sweet that he basically ordered her food for her. I never noticed BJ and James because, you know, I didn't know he was about to save my life, so whatever. I was waiting because I just knew that their order wasn't ready. So I never really even approached a worker because obviously you could see what's ready and what's not ready, and their food wasn't. So I was just sitting, waiting. A little impatient, actually. Especially for someone who didn't even want to be at the Waffle House. I don't eat Waffle House, let the record show, never did. Stand up, boom, that's the sudden, yeah. Like I said, I fell. There was a slight moment where I had to decide if I was gonna turn around and explode at an angle or I was gonna fall. Happy I decided to fall. I'm hiding. breathless at this moment. I hear them. I have no clue what's going on right now. I'm waiting. Because like I said, I don't know what's going on. My eyes are closed. Didn't know where the shooter was. The best thing to do was just continue to be still like I had been. At this time, I'm hearing people move, so I'm about to get up. I'm positioning myself to get up. As I said, I have to move around the bar, the cushions, the stationary seats. I'm getting up, about to run around the bar frantically. I slip and I fall, and Mr. De Silva's blood.
And what did you slip on?
Mr. De Silva's blood. I was running on my heels, so it was slippery. I fell, like I said, and in this moment, I'm breathing, I'm thinking, I'm afraid, I'm seeing this blood. I'm trying to assess myself for any damages, and I'm seeing Tia's leg. I did say a few words over her leg before I left out of there. And like I said as well, I was assessing myself because now I have blood all over me, so I didn't know if I was hit, my adrenaline was rushing. I just knew I had to go. And I got up and I honestly, I lost it for a second. And then I was like, no, I gotta go. Fall flat out the door in heels. Dodge the car, get into the Central, start it up, I get out of there. I go around the curve entrance, and yeah, I proceed down the street.
All right. You said that you had injuries from glass. Mm-hmm. Where were the injuries from the glass?
The injuries from the glass were on my face. Like I said, it was just minor little scratches and lacerations. That was physical. The mental damage is forever.
And with regards to the glass, was there a point where you or someone else was pulling glass actually out of your face?
Yes, there was actually. A small piece lodged in my face. Yeah.
All right. But you were treated and released, so you got some minor
I did. I had
bandages
bandages on my face. I had a sling from my shoulder that was very bruised. Mm-hmm.
All right. And did all this happen in Nashville-Davidson County?
It did.
Okay. All right. Those are my questions.
Good morning, Ms. Shaw.
Good morning.
I just got a few questions for you.
Yes.
And my questions will pick up. We just saw in the video where you had gotten back in the vehicle and y'all drove off the parking lot onto Murfreesboro Road.
Correct.
Okay, you recall that. So that evening, you said you drove onto Murfreesboro Road, and then you basically got away from there. And then at some point, you were interviewed by a detective. Do you recall that morning?
Yes.
And does the name Detective Summerall ring a bell to you at all?
No, not at all.
Okay, but you recall talking to a detective
Right.
about what happened. And do you recall telling that detective that day that after y'all got in the car and you got on Murfreesboro Road and you were driving down the road, that you actually saw Mr. Reinking, who was nude at that point in time?
I did.
Okay. And do you recall telling Officer Summerall that Mr. Reinking was actually walking on the shoulder of the road without any clothes? Do you recall telling him that?
I might have said walking, but yes.
Okay. All righty. Thank you.
No regret, Judge. Thank you, Ms. Shelley. Please step down.
All right, that concludes this survivor's testimony. Oh my gosh, that footage is so impactful with watching her drop. And it's interesting watching the footage over and over again from all the testimony we've heard, and to reflect on how quickly all this really did happen. When I initially heard the story, I did imagine it being a bit more drawn out, but honestly, it was so quick from the time that he initially shot in, the glass shattered, he walked in, the defendant walked to the right, and to hear about all the damage he caused on the left side of the Waffle House as well, and the victims on that side, it's almost like through the footage, you don't even quite get a grasp for how many shots he truly shot. They said that he shot about 15 inside the Waffle House, and it was quick. It was very quick in the time that he shot off those rounds, and very sporadically with not much direct intent, but rather just overall chaos. So now we're gonna look at a couple agents, officers that were part of the team that took the defendant into custody once they found him, and they'll enlighten us a bit on Travis's state that he was in, physically and mentally.
Good morning, Detective. Would you please state your name and spell it?
Megan Arnett, MEGAN ARNETT.
And where are you employed?
Metro Nashville Police Department.
What's your role there?
My current role, I'm a field training officer on patrol out in South.
Oh, sorry, not detective, officer.
I was a detective at the time of the incident.
That was what I was going to get to then.
Sorry.
And the incident that we're talking about is April 22nd, 23rd of 2018?
Yes.
Okay. And how did you get involved?
At that time, I was assigned to the narcotics unit with Metro Nashville Police Department, and we got called in to help with assisting the search of Mr. Reinking.
What was your, as you assisted in the search, what exactly were you doing?
We were given information when the public would call in and have possible sightings of where Mr. Reinking might be. So we would respond to multiple different locations, trying to locate the subject.
Okay. Now, as you were attempting to locate the suspect, what exactly were you doing?
They had sent out information and pictures of what Mr. Reinking looked like, and we would just check the areas depending on if it was behind buildings, inside, locations like a Publix, things of that nature, kind of all over the South Nashville area.
How long did you spend in your search on Sunday, April 22nd?
I believe I got in around 1 or 2 p.m. We got called in. I was actually out of town initially. So once I got into town, we stayed until, I know, into dark. I'm not sure the exact time, maybe 10 or 11. And then we were told to come back in the next morning.
And how about on Monday, the 23rd?
I cannot recall the exact time. I want to say it was around 6 a.m. and then we had just started answering those type of calls that were coming in that whole day as well.
What areas were you searching?
The South Nashville, Antioch, and Hermitage area.
At some point in time around, I guess, midday of the 23rd, did you receive any information that the defendant, Travis Reinking, had been located?
We had gotten information or a tip that was saying they believed he had went into a wood line near 5,000 Mountain Springs. At that point, Sergeant Briner, as well as I think it was Detective Greg, responded and made contact with the tipster, who advised that he'd went into the wood line in that area, and so then I responded to basically the opposite side of the wood line.
And once you responded in the wood line, what, if anything, did you learn about what was going on?
I'd actually initially responded to the Old Hickory Boulevard side, and then once I was getting to that area, I heard Detective, now Special Agent Williams, get over the radio stating that he had located the subject inside the wood line, advised us he was just inside the wood line in front of his vehicle on Sprucedale. So at that point, I responded to that side of onto Sprucedale.
And did you enter the wood line?
I did. Once we got to that location, I went up, basically directly up the hill into the wood line from where Detective Williams' vehicle was. At that point, I saw Rankings proned out on the ground and was actively being handcuffed by other detectives.
What was the weather like at the time?
It had been the day prior raining a lot, and it had been off and on raining the whole time.
Was the ground wet?
Yes.
Where was the defendant, Mr. Reinking, at when you encountered him?
He was still proned out on the ground.
What does prone mean?
Laying face down. At that point, they were already handcuffing him. Normally, we have subjects prone out with their hands out where we can see them, just in case they have any type of weapons or anything on them. But at that point, they were already working into handcuffing him.
You observed the other officers putting his arms behind his back to handcuff him?
Yes.
At any time while you were watching him, did he attempt to pull his arms away?
Not that I observed, but at that point I'd kind of turned around to try to figure out our exact location so that I could get more response to the location.
Okay. What if anything, did you notice to be in his possession?
At that point, I still observed a black backpack that was on his back.
Okay. What happened to the backpack?
Once we got him up off of the ground, or at least set up, we decided to cut off of his backpack since he was already handcuffed and it was around his arms on his back.
Once you cut off the backpack, what happened with it?
They set it down next to him. At that point, command had requested us to check the backpack to see if he had any type of weapons on him. At that point, Sergeant Briner instructed me, since I was not dealing with the subject and had gloves and stuff available in my kit, that I put on gloves and opened up the backpack to check if there was any sort of weapons inside the backpack.
Okay. And did you actually look in the backpack?
I did. So once I opened up the backpack, I observed a silver Kimber 45 caliber that was loaded, and the hammer was pulled back like it was ready to fire.
And Officer Arnett, I'm going to pass up some photos, providing a copy to defense. Would you please look through those and see if they are a fair and accurate depiction of the backpack and its contents as you saw them on April 23rd, 2018?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, I'd ask they be made exhibit number 20. It's a composite exhibit, so it'd be A through G.
A through G?
Yes.
Is this the real G?
It's the real A through G this time, Judge, yes. Officer Arnett, I'm showing you what is 20A. Is this the backpack that was cut off the back of Travis Reinking?
Yes, it is.
And do you see Travis Reinking in the courtroom today?
I do.
Could you please identify him?
He's over there with the defense in a blue button-up.
Okay. And so is that the backpack that you searched through on April 23rd?
It is.
What does 20B show?
It shows a Bible that was in the backpack, as well as a flashlight and a box of ammunition.
What about 20C?
That is the firearm that was inside the backpack.
Did the firearm appear to have a magazine in it when you saw it?
What I recall, yes.
Okay. And I think you stated that the gun was cocked or something like that. What does that mean?
So on this type of firearm, it has a hammer on the back and it was pulled back.
You can touch the screen and
right here.
And what does that mean?
It's just another level of, so depending on the type of firearm, it has it where it's ready to, when they pull trigger, the hammer will move forward and hit the primer and shoot the gun.
So that gun, if it was loaded, would be ready to fire.
Correct.
Okay, 20D. Is this the same weapon on top of the backpack?
Yes, it is.
And is that a magazine here?
Yes, it appears to be one that would go with that firearm.
All right. And 20E?
That is a holster, a gun, firearm holster, more ammunition, as well as some silver, what I believe to be silver bars.
And I'm going to circle what I believe the holster you're referring to is. Is that correct?
Yes.
What do you see here?
Boxes of ammunition, silver bars.
And would you point to where the silver bars are, or just kind of put a line by them? All right. Now, 20G, what are those?
Water bottles.
And do you know if those items were taken in, collected and taken into evidence?
To my knowledge, yes. I stood by with the items until the ID got there to collect the items.
And did he have any thing on his actual person?
I know the other detectives took something off, but I do not know for sure what all items were taken off of his person.
Understood. Officer Arnett, what was the defendant's demeanor as you observed him that day?
He appeared to be compliant, but like I said, I didn't really deal with him that much. I saw that they had taken him into custody and handled, so then at that point I was trying to get our exact location. I went out and asked someone that lived there like what their address was to get more response, and then at that point I stayed with the backpack.
All right. Those are my questions, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Morning.
So just wanted to follow up on a few things that you talked about. You talked a little bit about Mr. Reinking's demeanor. You said you weren't around him for all that long. About how long would you say you were around him total that morning?
I would say approximately around him, 30 minutes or more, but I was not dealing with him directly. I was doing other tasks.
Okay. So around him, so you would say amount of time you may have been actually observing him would have been even less than that 30 minutes, correct?
Correct.
The backpack, from the pictures, and it appears to be wet through and through. Is that accurate?
I had gloves on. I mean, you could appear that it was wet, but I don't know about through and through. I mean, it was wet, definitely, but it was also had been raining and everything.
But like the cartridge boxes, the Hornady cartridge boxes, specifically on, I think it's Exhibit 20B, they appear to be wet, correct?
Yes, sir.
The firearm itself, Exhibit 20C, it was wet as well. Is that correct?
From that picture, it appeared to be wet, but like I said, it was still inside the backpack. ID is the ones that removed all of the items.
Okay. And so when we talked about earlier, you said, and specifically I think on Exhibit 20C, that the hammer on the firearm was pulled back.
Correct.
And circled it. Did you actually handle the firearm to try to render it safe or take any steps in that direction?
No, I did not.
All right. So these pictures that you looked at, who actually? Well, let me ask it this way: are you the one that actually removed the firearm, sat it down, and snapped these pictures?
No, that would have been ID.
Okay. When you looked in the backpack, did you handle the firearm at all?
I didn't pick it up. I may have moved it out of the way just to see what else was in there, but it was laying and pointed upward.
Okay. So literally you didn't even move it out of the backpack. You looked in, saw that the hammer was cocked back.
Correct.
And just took note of everything in the backpack.
Correct.
You also said there was a holster in the backpack, correct?
Yes.
The firearm was not in the holster, is that correct?
No, it was not.
And I think on the first picture, maybe, or excuse me, 20B, you noted that there was a Bible. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. No, you're right. No. Thank you, officer.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Detective. Would you please state your name and spell it for the record?
Kimberly Brown, Kimberly, Brown, Brown.
And where are you employed?
Metro Nashville Police Department.
What's your current assignment?
My current assignment is the Training Academy.
What was your assignment back in April of 2018?
I was a detective with the narcotics unit assigned to the Specialized Investigations Division.
Did you participate in the search to attempt to locate Travis Reinking on April 22nd and April 23rd of 2018?
I did.
Which day did you become involved in the search?
Both days.
Okay. About how many hours on the 22nd did you participate in the search?
I'm not sure. We were there till dark and then had to turn around and come back the next morning. I'm not sure the exact total hours.
Okay. But you were searching all day?
Yes, sir.
At some point in time on April 23rd, did you come in contact with Travis Reinking?
I did.
And do you see him in the courtroom today?
I do.
Could you please identify him?
Yes, sir. He's sitting with counsel in a blue button-up long sleeve shirt.
Where was the defendant when you encountered him?
In the woodlines off of, I'm thinking the road name, Sprucedale.
Okay.
The woods there between Sprucedale and I think it was Mount, I'm terrible with the road names, Mount Springs Road.
When you encountered him, what was he doing?
He was in the proned out position, meaning that he was laying face down on his stomach with his arms and legs outstretched to his side.
Did he have anything on him?
He had a backpack on his back.
And who was there with you in addition to the defendant?
Now Special Agent Kyle Williams, he had him at gunpoint, proned out on the ground, and then myself and Detective Oscar Gomez responded to the scene.
What did you do once you responded to the scene?
Initially got there, my Detective Special Agent Williams had him at gunpoint, proned out, so I advised Detective Special Agent Williams that if he would maintain cover on Mr. Reinking, that I would go hands-on and cuff him and place him under arrest.
And were you able to cuff him?
I was.
What exactly did you do in terms of placing him in the handcuffs?
So basically just routine protocol, told him to look away from me, which he did. I approached him from the side and grabbed his right arm in a kneeling position on his side, brought it to his back, started to cuff that hand. About that time, Detective Gomez had found us in the woods, and he went around to the left-hand side, grabbed his left hand, and we placed him in the handcuffs together.
Did the defendant put up any resistance as you were placing his hand behind his back?
No.
And did he put up any resistance as you observed Detective Gomez put the defendant's hand, the other hand behind his back?
No, sir.
Did any time that you interact with him, did he put up any resistance to you?
No, sir.
Was he at all times compliant?
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that, I think you mentioned, did he have a backpack on him?
He sure did.
Okay. What happened with the backpack after you placed his hands in handcuffs behind his back?
We had to cut it off his person.
And what did you do with the backpack once you cut it off his person?
Opened it and looked inside for its contents.
Okay. And Your Honor, I'd ask that. Yes. It's kind of torn, yeah.
Yeah, it's already.
Detective, would you look at that bag, the paper bag?
Yes, sir.
And tell me if there is anything that shows that that's packages associated with this case.
Yes.
And what is it?
Well, it says Metropolitan Nashville Police Department. It has suspect Travis Reinking on there, and it has some control numbers, descriptions, dates.
Is there an incident number associated with it?
Yes, sir.
And what is that?
2018-03-59285.
Okay. And does it have a description of what is contained in the paper bag?
It does. It says backpack, and then it lists all the other items: holster, multi-tool bag with 3 AA batteries, a pen, a mag light, sunscreen bottle, a Bible, and water bottles.
Okay, and are those some of the items that you found in the possession of the defendant?
Yes, sir.
I'd ask that be made the state's next exhibit.
And just for clarification,
Yes, Judge.
is it just the backpack, not the contents?
Well, Judge, actually, we can allow her to open it up just to be clear.
Because I didn't know they got ended up packed separately or what.
I'll ask her to open it so that we can see. Some of the contents are not contained therein, and I will admit those separately, but...
Let me just clarify.
Yes, Judge.
That's just another bag, basically the same outer bag, just it looks like it got repackaged. Would you like me to pull it out of the brown paper bag?
Just for the record, we can know what all.
Okay. And Detective, would you show us where you had to cut the backpack?
You can see at the bottom, it's cut right here. And then this one, it looks like we were able to unbind it, but this side is cut.
And what you just showed us, are those the straps to the backpack?
Yes.
I just want the record to...
Yes, sir.
Okay. Could you describe for us what you're seeing inside of the backpack?
Sure. There's a Bible. There are several water bottles. There is a black pistol holster. It looks like a Black Hawk. A bottle of sunscreen. There is a mag-light flashlight. And also, when I opened it up that day, there were some silver bars in there. I don't see them in the backpack now, but those were.
Would you hold up set out at least one or two of those water bottles, please? So
Sure.
I can see them.
Running out of space.
Detective, the water bottle that just fell, is that full of water?
So two of them, those two are, and the one is empty.
Okay. And you said there was a gun holster inside of
Yes,
the
sir.
backpack? Could you pull that out so we can see it? Okay. Right. Now, you just mentioned that there were some silver bars.
Yes, sir.
And were there any cartridges inside the backpack?
Yes, there were. There was some boxes of ammunition inside the bag, along with several silver bars. I'm not exactly sure the number of silver bars that were in the bag, but they were present.
Yes. Yes.
You can put the backpack in there.
Let me put all this back. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Would you pick up the larger of those two bags? Yes. And could you tell me if you're able to determine if that bag is associated with this case?
It is. It has the incident number on the top. It has the suspect information, and it has the description as 45 ACP cartridges.
Okay. And are those some of the items that you found inside of the backpack that is now Exhibit 21?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'd ask that be made the next exhibit and that the witness be allowed
You
to
want me to open it?
once it's, I guess, officially.
And yes, they were inside the backpack.
And what are those?
This is a box of 20 cartridges, Hornady brand, for the firearm.
What is the caliber? Does it say?
It says 45 auto on the box.
Okay. All right. And that item that you just grabbed, what are you able to determine from the packaging if it is associated with this case?
Yes, sir. As with the other ones, it has the incident number, suspect information, and then it has a description on here. It says 11 10 troy ounce silver bars.
And did you find silver bars inside the backpack that is now in evidence? It states as Exhibit 21 when you searched it when you looked in it on April 23rd?
Yes, the bars were inside the backpack.
Okay, and would you please open them up so we can see them? I'm sorry. I'd ask that be made the next exhibit. And permission for her to open them and display them.
Okay.
Okay. And just so we can get an understanding of the weight of
Yes,
that
sir.
package, could you kind of, not hard such that you might break the table, but just
Yes,
drop a little.
It's very heavy.
Thank you. That's all for that one. I have
Louder than my gavel.
Yeah. Make it out of silver, sir.
Detective, you were just past the box. When you looked inside of the backpack that you cut off of the defendant on April 23rd, 2018, did you find any firearm inside of it?
Yes, sir, I did.
And what kind of firearm did you find?
It was a silver, initially all I saw was a silver firearm inside the bag. Being that I did not have gloves on it in the moment, I did not pull it out, but I was on scene when it was pulled from the bag by Detective Arnett, and it was a Kimber 45.
Okay. And the box that is in front of you, can you look at it and determine if that was associated with this case?
Yes, sir. It has the same incident number, suspect information, and then on the box it says a Kimber Pro carry with magazine.
Okay. And Detective, have you had any experience with making sure that a firearm has been made safe?
Yes.
And what are the steps that would be made in order to ensure that a firearm has been made safe?
So if there's a magazine in the firearm, we would release the magazine from the firearm, and then if to make sure there's not one in the chamber, we would slide the rail to the rear, and if there was a bullet in there, it would have been ejected. So that makes the firearm safe, meaning that it could not function because there is no ammunition inside the firearm.
Okay. And on that box, is there any indication whether or not that the contents of it have been made safe?
I would assume it is, only because we do not turn items into property unless they are made safe. I could open it up and see, but I'm not sure on the outside of the box if it would say that.
Well, first, Your Honor, I'd ask that be made a state's next exhibit, and with the permission of the court, allow her to at least look before she does anything else to determine if the firearm is safe.
Sure. Pointed at anyone.
Yes, sir. All the tape.
Now, Detective, have you had the opportunity to look at the firearm?
Yes.
Based on your observation, does that firearm appear to be safe?
Yes, we do that, and then we also, once it's made safe, the magazine is out of the firearm. The chamber is empty. There are zip ties that we run through the firearm just for extra protection, and those are on the firearm.
And would you just check one more time to make sure there's no round inside of the chamber?
Sure. Well, it's zip tied to the box, so you can see inside of the well, and there is nothing there.
Okay. I'd ask that Your Honor, if she can, now that she's testified that it has been made safe, that she be able to display the firearm just hold it up so that the jury can see.
Hold it up in the box.
Yes, sir.
And Detective, you just picked something up and put it in your right hand.
Yes, this is the magazine for the firearm.
And is there anything? I can't see if
there's nothing in it. If there were ammunition in it, you would see it here in the top.
Okay, understood.
All right.
Detective, were you present when the defendant's identification was verified?
Yes.
And how was that done?
He had a wallet on his person, and inside that wallet was an identification card. It was a Colorado ID.
Okay. And did he have were there any other contents of that wallet?
I did not. Well, there was money in it that could be seen. However, I did not pull everything out of the wallet knowing the case as to what it was going to be. I didn't want to manipulate anything other than the things we needed just to ID Mr. Reinking. Okay.
So I'd ask that you pick up the item that appears to be consistent with the wallet. And then are you able to determine whether or not that was associated with this case?
May I open it?
Well, does it have any indication?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, it has the incident number, suspect information, all the metro documentation, and inside it says leather wallet.
Okay. I ask that be made Exhibit 25. And now there's a clear package. You just testified that you observed that there was some money inside of his wallet. Was it, when you say money, do you mean cash money?
Yes, cash, paper, dollars.
Sure. And would you look at that package and tell me if that is associated with this case?
Yes, it has the case number, which is the incident number, the description of it, and it's the same markings as all the other evidence.
And what is it? What's the description?
It says 23, 20, and 4 $1 bills. Total money $464.
All right. Ask that be made the next exhibit. Lastly, Detective Brown, you have one more item before you. Would you please look at that package and tell us if that has been associated with this case?
Yes, sir. It has same incident number, same suspect information, same documentation as all the other items.
Okay. Were you present for any portion of the search where a magazine or item of that effect was removed from the defendant's person?
Yes, all the items that were taken off his person were handed to me to hold on to until we were able to get to the backpack.
And so describe what those items that came from his person.
He had a multi-tool, a wallet, and a spare magazine.
Okay, do you recall where the spare magazine was?
It was in one of his front pockets. I'm not sure left or right, but it was in a front pants pocket.
Okay, all right. And what was the description on the package that you just discussed?
This says spare Kimber magazine.
Now, I'd ask that be made the next exhibit. Those are my questions. Thank you, Detective.
Thank you, sir.
Could you please state your full name for the record?
Officer Brian Penny.
And are you employed with the Metro Nashville Police Department?
I am.
What is your current position?
As of right now, I work South A Community Engagement Team.
And can you explain what that means, Community Engagement Team?
The Community Engagement Team? Basically, we take a small area in South Precinct and do intensive work with the community, trying to, I believe you've heard of the free libraries, that type of thing. We do a lot of that type of thing and just assist wherever we can with the people in the community.
So is it fair to say that you have a lot of interaction with different people that either reside in South Precinct or are visiting South Precinct?
That would be correct.
And how long have you been at the Metro Nashville Police Department?
Just over 12 years now.
And what were your previous positions, if you've had any other than South Precinct?
Well, I've always worked in South Precinct. Before that, I worked patrol on C shift. I've worked A shift. I've also worked the burglary unit.
And working patrol, can you just briefly describe what that entails?
It can really just kind of day to day, it changes. You can do anything from going to domestic calls, where people have those type of issues, to anything where they have possible psychological issues, where we go out and people are suicidal, homicidal, something along that lines. We just ascertain from our conversations with them, and then call mobile crisis, and if need be, take them in, and they can have those conversations with those professionals.
And prior to working at the Metro Nashville Police Department, what, if any, other positions have you had related to law enforcement?
Well, I worked at Rutherford County Sheriff's Department for a while. I also worked at DeBerry, the maximum security prison.
And is that a special needs facility?
It is.
And specifically, can you describe what type of special needs are housed there?
Well, the unit I worked on was 7D. That unit dealt with a lot of people with schizophrenia and different bipolar, manic episodes, that type of thing. They just weren't allowed to be around other prisoners just because of the fact they would constantly have bad interactions.
And during that position that you had at DeBerry Special Needs Facility, as well as at the Rutherford County Sheriff's Department, as well as at the Metro Nashville Police Department, have you received any training related to dealing with people that suffer from mental illnesses?
Yes, absolutely. When we went through training for the initial, our initial training with the police department, we had a extensive studies where we went and talked to mental health co-op, and they explained to us what we needed to look for, different things that we needed to be aware of, and basically when we were going to have to contact them to get that type of assistance.
And what are those signs that you've been trained to look for?
A lot of times you'll have individuals that are very manic. That means they're very energetic. They have those types of issues where they're unable to sit still, unable to comply. A lot of them are very aggressive. They have a tendency of just doing things just outside of the norm.
And in your interactions in any of the positions that you've described, have you personally interacted with people that have suffered from mental illnesses?
Absolutely.
And how often would you say that you do that?
Probably once a week.
And that's over the course of how many years?
15, 16 years.
And specifically, have you interacted with people that have had a diagnosis of schizophrenia?
Yes.
And in your interactions with people with schizophrenia, is there anything specific that you have either been trained to look for or that you have experienced yourself?
So one of the ways it was described to us, they put headphones on our heads, and basically with those headphones on, you were there was a recording of a variety of different people. Some of them were yelling at you, some of them were talking, some of them were crying, and that type of thing. And then they would look at you and say, "Talk to me." And you would sit there and try to carry on a conversation with the person in front of you when you had those headphones on, where you heard people screaming and crying and that type of thing, and it showed how distracted they were. And it kind of makes sense from the standpoint of with that type of distraction, it's very difficult for them to be able to comply or have any type of I guess the best way to say it, be able to carry on a normal life.
And I want to kind of go to this specific incident from April 23rd of 2018. Can you describe how you became involved in the arrest and apprehension of Travis Reinking?
Okay. That morning, at about 6 o'clock, I believe it was, we were notified, and we began to scour the woods and look in the area, attempting to locate him. During the course of us looking for the individual, we were called and told to go to Sprucedale. So we got over to Sprucedale. The suspect was actually already in a vehicle. We were told to take him out of that vehicle, put him in Officer Feeney's car, and we took him and transported him to South Precinct.
So let me stop you there. So Sprucedale, that area, can you describe what that area is?
It's condominiums.
And so there was an area that was near the condominiums that you responded to. Is that correct?
Correct.
And is that the location where they had taken him out of the woods?
Yes.
And so you said he was in a vehicle. What type of vehicle was he in?
He was in an SUV. I believe it was a marked SUV.
And was that a law enforcement vehicle?
Yes.
Okay. And so you said that, I think you used the term, we arrived. Who were you with?
Myself, Officer Feeney, and Officer Corman.
And your job was, I guess, generally called to transport. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so when you first encountered Mr. Reinking, was he seated in the vehicle?
Yes.
And was the door open or closed? Or do you remember?
I don't remember.
So the first time that you see him, he's inside the vehicle. Can you describe his appearance and his demeanor?
His demeanor was calm. He was handcuffed. Wasn't any issues at that particular point. He was wearing a pair of blue jeans, Converse tennis shoes, and I can't remember what color shirt he had, but he was, at that particular point, we noticed he was kind of wet, but it had been raining for the last 2 days, so we were just, that was our initial contact with him.
And so from that point, you're taking him out of that vehicle, and then moving him to a separate vehicle. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And what's the second vehicle that he's moved to?
It was Officer Feeney's, his unmarked patrol car.
And can you describe the area of the patrol car that Mr. Reinking would have been placed in Officer Feeney's unmarked car?
It was in the back seat. We call it in the caged area.
And how large is that area?
Well, everybody complains it's not that big, but I mean it's a plastic seated with a gate or with a cage in front of it, and it's just a normal back seat of a vehicle.
Can you describe kind of that interaction from taking Mr. Reinking from the first vehicle where you encounter him to taking him to Officer Feeney's vehicle?
Completely compliant. There was no issues. I would say a model, suspect. No issues with him at all.
And when you say that he complied, did you have to physically take him from one vehicle to the other, or were you giving directions?
Well, usually when we do that, we usually just hold the inside of the elbow, and that's just because you never know exactly what's going through anybody's mind. But and the fact that they're handcuffed behind the back, you just if they go to fall or something along that lines, you don't want them to fall because they can't catch themselves. So we just assisted him to the other vehicle. No problems whatsoever. Nothing notable.
And what happened after Mr. Reinking was placed in that second vehicle, Officer Feeney's vehicle?
He was seatbelted in, and we transported him to South Precinct, and almost directly after that, we transported him to General Hospital.
And so when you transported him to South Precinct, was he actually taken out of the vehicle and taken into the South Precinct building?
Yes.
And again, can you describe that interaction?
He was just placed in a room after at that particular point in time. I didn't have any interactions with him
and I'm really just talking about going from the car into the building. Can you describe how he was acting? Was he compliant?
Completely compliant. No issues from him whatsoever.
And is he being given directions of where to go? And
yes, I was giving him complex directions as far as when I patted him down again. We pat people down progressively just for our own protection. And I believe at that particular point, after I told him to put his hands behind his back, I put handcuffs on him. I told him, I said, face away from me. I'm going to put shackles on your legs. Like I said, everything he did, there was no issue whatsoever with him.
Which, Officer Penny, you just said that you did a second search. When was the first search done?
When we initially put him in the vehicle.
Okay, is that Officer Feeney's vehicle?
That's correct, ma'am.
Sorry.
That's right.
So you take him from the first vehicle, put him in Officer Feeney's vehicle, and you do a pat down.
Correct.
And were you giving him directions during that?
Yes.
And was he compliant with those?
Completely compliant.
And so after you get him out of Officer Feeney's vehicle at South Precinct, you do a second search. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is that the point that his legs are put in shackles?
Correct.
Okay. And so he's at South Precinct for some amount of time, and then you're given a direction to transport him to another location. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is that second location?
That's Meharry Hospital, General Hospital.
And is there any pat down done before he's transported?
I'm not aware of that that particular point.
And so he's given directions to get into the vehicle again. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And any issues with that?
None whatsoever.
And then once you arrive at the hospital, what directions are given to him, or what is done with him from the time that he is removed from the vehicle?
Okay. So when we pull up around the back side of it, usually where the ambulances park, he was removed from the vehicle and told to step around the back of it, and we were going in the emergency doors. He stepped around. One of the nurses told us which room to put him in. The entire time he stood beside us with no issue whatsoever, and then stepped inside the room and sat down on a gurney and stayed there until the medical staff did their evaluation.
And how long of a period of time were you with Mr. Reinking that day?
About 6 hours.
And that's the entirety of that 6 hours, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So at the hospital, what is going on at the hospital? You just said that initially he sat on a gurney.
Mm-hmm.
were you and Officer Corman and Officer Feeney, are you all with him during
Correct.
the entire time?
The entirety of it.
And is he still cuffed?
At that particular point, we did not have him cuffed just simply because laying in that laid down position, being cuffed behind your back, it's extremely uncomfortable. He was being completely cooperative with us, so we took the handcuffs off of him and didn't handcuff him at that particular point.
And during this time, is he, not specifically you interacting with him, but are the healthcare people at the hospital, the nurses, whoever's seeing him, are they interacting with him?
Yes, ma'am.
And are you observing that interaction?
I am.
And is he able to communicate with them?
Yes,
And is he responsive to the questions that they're asking?
he was.
And can you describe what, if any, treatment he received at the hospital?
At that, I believe they took his blood pressure, his temperature. They, at some point in time, I believe blood was drawn. I'm not sure about that, but I think there was blood drawn. They might have. We also had property and evidence take his clothes because he was still in the clothes that he had walked out of the woods with. So all the clothes were taken. He was put in a paper gown.
And is that something that he did himself, remove his clothing items, or did someone have to do that for him?
He did it himself.
And so was he given directions of what to do?
He was.
So item by item to
We
remove
started with the
it.
shirt and worked all the way down.
And then putting on the paper clothes, did he do that himself?
Yes, ma'am.
And was that also done after giving direction?
Correct.
And during that time, I mean, you've described it's multiple hours. Are you speaking with Mr. Reinking?
Excuse me. No, ma'am. We did not speak with him directly. We didn't want to have a conversation with him or anything. We didn't want to jeopardize any type of investigation.
And what, if anything, are you and Officer Corman and Officer Feeney doing? Are y'all quiet the entire time?
Well, we were trying to figure out, just due to the nature of the call and the time period we were going to be there, we were having conversations trying to figure out, how we were going to work this. Officer Corman and Officer Feeney were riding in the same vehicle, so we were still trying to work out the logistics of getting from point A to point B. Mr. Reinking just sat there and watched us and sit there and listen to the conversation as we were there.
And how was he acting during that time?
When I was talking, he would sit there and look at me. When the other officer was talking, he was sitting there being cognizant of paying attention to each one of our, whatever we were talking about.
And what, if any, other medical treatment did he receive?
I believe they ended up having to draw urine from him to see if he was dehydrated.
And when you say draw urine, what do you mean by that?
They had to catheterize him.
And did they attempt to get a urine sample before doing a catheter?
Yes, ma'am. He said he couldn't pee.
And I guess someone had to have discussed that with him. Is that
That's
correct?
One of the nurses told him exactly what the procedure involved, and the procedure was done.
And were you present for that?
I was.
And were there any issues with inserting the catheter?
No, ma'am. None whatsoever.
And was he compliant with all of the treatment that he received at the hospital?
He was. They gave him several different, I believe they gave him orange juice and water, just trying to get him hydrated, so he could urinate. And like I said, each time they gave him orange juice or whatever, he took it and drank it. So, there was no issues from it whatsoever.
If I can have just one moment. Thank you, Officer Feeney. I don't have any other questions.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So it sounds like you're saying you were around Mr. Reinking that afternoon, or that day rather, for about a 6-hour period?
Approximately.
And that's during transports in the car, right? And then at South Precinct?
Yes, sir.
And at South Precinct, were you with him continuously throughout that period, like in the same room, or?
At one particular point in time, I wasn't, but he was placed in a room, and like I said, when he was placed in that room, I went to go get a drink or something. I've been in the woods all day, so.
Sure. And during that period of time, did you ever go in that room with him, or did he stay inside a different room and you were outside the room for a period of time?
I was outside the room for a period of time.
Right. So during this 6-hour window, there are points in time for which you're not directly with Mr. Reinking. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Like, for instance, at South Precinct, how long was he inside that room?
Maybe 15, 20 minutes.
Okay. At other times throughout that 6-hour time period you were talking about, are there other incidences where you would have not been in direct proximity to Mr. Reinking?
Other than going to tell the nurse that he couldn't urinate, no, I was with him the entire time.
Okay.
And he was in the back of one vehicle and I was in another vehicle.
All right, so during the drive, you weren't in the car with him?
Correct. During the drive, I was not in the vehicle.
I think, and that's right, you said here you're in the, I think you call it the tail vehicle.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. And during your time period with Mr. Reinking, as it relates, I think you've already been talked about the other officers that were around. Mr. Reinking never said a word. Is that correct?
That's correct.
6 hours, never said a word.
Other than I can't pee, and I believe that was it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Redirect, Steve.
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, officer.
Officer Corman, could you please state your name for the record?
Yes, ma'am. My name is Ricky Corman.
And could you spell your first and last name?
Yes, the first name is Ricky, Rickie. My last name is Corman, Corman.
And are you employed with the Metro Nashville Police Department?
Yes, ma'am.
And what's your position?
Police officer.
How long have you been with the police department?
7 years.
And where are you assigned currently?
I'm currently assigned to South Precinct.
How long have you been at South Precinct?
The duration of my career, 7 years.
And as a police officer with the Metro Nashville Police Department, have you received any training in dealing with people that suffer from mental illnesses?
Yes, ma'am, we have. During the training academy, we have training. The mental health co-op comes out and trains us, and then we have usually an annual training each year to like a refresher course.
And during your experiences with just everyday kind of interactions with people as a police officer, have you interacted with people who suffer from mental illness?
Yes, ma'am.
And how often would you say that happens during a regular work week?
At least once a week.
And specifically, have you interacted with people that suffer from schizophrenia?
Yes, ma'am.
And how often would you say that has happened?
Probably not as common as once a week, but on at least a monthly basis.
And your training as well as your own experiences, what if any signs would you look for when determining if someone is suffering from a mental illness?
Usually, if they're not verbal and telling us that they're in a crisis, that you can usually tell by their actions. They're usually pretty hyper. They have a hard time focusing. A lot of times they'll be combative with you.
And drawing your attention specifically to that April 23rd of 2018, did you assist in the arrest and transport of Travis Reinking?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you describe what, if anything, you did related to that?
On that day of April 23rd, myself and Officer Feeney and Officer Penny, we were South Flex team. We were in the area and we were searching the woods, just canvassing the area. A call went out that the suspect had possibly been spotted. We received direction from our lieutenant to proceed to that location on Sprucedale Drive to take custody of the suspect and transport him to South Precinct as soon as possible.
And were you in the vehicle that Mr. Reinking was actually transported in from that scene?
Yes, ma'am.
And is that Officer Feeney's vehicle?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you describe your interaction, if any, with Mr. Reinking from taking him from the vehicle that he was in when you arrived to Officer Feeney's vehicle?
Yes, ma'am. When we arrived on Sprucedale, I was directed to the unmarked SUV that Mr. Reinking was sitting in, at which time I approached the vehicle, identified myself, told him I was going to be transferring him to another vehicle, asked him to step out of the vehicle, at which time he proceeded, complied, stepped out.
I took him by the elbow and escorted him to the other vehicle, Officer Feeney's vehicle.
And so you are actually the officer that took him by the elbow, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And was he compliant with all of those directions?
Yes, ma'am.
And when you were touching his elbow, is that kind of a light touch or a hard grasp, or what was needed?
Given his size in comparison to me, at first I thought it was going to be a very strong grab, but he was so compliant and I just had to loosely guide him.
And how tall are you?
I'm 5'4".
And I guess kind of comparatively to Mr. Reinking, do you know exactly how tall he is, or can you describe the difference in height?
It was significant to me. He felt almost a whole body height, half a body taller than me.
But you said that you were able to just lightly grasp his elbow, is that
yes,
correct?
Mm-hmm.
And once he got in the vehicle, can you kind of describe that process of putting someone of his height and stature in the back of a police vehicle?
Yes, so he was handcuffed behind his back. So usually what we tell them is to back up to the door, put their bottom in first, and then duck their head to slide in. And someone that tall, we would tell to slide all the way across the seat of the car. So he was placed in the rear back behind the passenger seat.
And was he able to comply with all of those specific instructions?
Yes, ma'am.
And during, I guess from that point, where did you transport Mr. Reinking?
We were directed to take him to South Precinct.
And during that transport ride, can you describe what, if anything, he did?
He just sat in the back. We didn't interact with him. We didn't ask questions. We weren't really, myself and Officer Feeney weren't really conversing amongst ourselves. We were just focused on getting him to the precinct. By that time, we knew media had already gotten word of it, and so we used a caravan to transport him to South.
And can you describe what you mean by media? What, if anything else, is going on in that area from where you're transporting him from Sprucedale to South Precinct?
So where Sprucedale is, it's relatively close in proximity to where the command was set up, which was on Murfreesboro Pike at the Publix, which was directly across the street from the Waffle House.
And I guess how many people were in that area?
Of Sprucedale? There was a significant amount. There were a lot of plainclothes officers. Of course, we didn't recognize them, so we were being directed who to go to and whatnot. At that time, people were starting to exit the townhomes and take photographs and video.
And is all of these people coming out and taking pictures and video, is that in the area where Mr. Reinking would be able to observe that as well?
Possibly, if he was looking for it, yes.
And so once you go from the area of Sprucedale to the precinct, what's going on during that ride? Are there cars or anything?
At that point, we had a lead car, myself and Officer Feeney's car, and then we had two, I believe, that were trying to ride on our sides as a flank to keep media off of us. The real media didn't show up and start swarming the vehicle until we left South Precinct.
And can you describe that? When you left South Precinct, was it different than when you arrived?
Yes, ma'am. The media was all along the exterior fence. We tried to get him into the car as quickly as possible to protect him, at which time when we exit South Precinct, we have a gate, so we had to wait for the gate to open. As the gate opened, the media, we couldn't pull out because the media was swarming the car.
Can you estimate approximately how many persons you're referring to when you're describing the media?
20 to 30.
And during that time, how is Mr. Reinking acting?
He's just sitting in the back seat.
Any change in his behavior?
No.
And how would you describe his behavior and his demeanor?
He was calm. I mean, he was complying with everything we said. If anything, he just leaned up against the back of the seat and not as close up to what we call the cage, where you can see and interact with the officers.
And during your 7 years as a police officer, have you ever transported someone under those circumstances?
Under the high-profile circumstances with the media? Yes. No, this was the first time I've ever had media chasing us.
And how did it make you feel?
It was a little unnerving, especially when we were transporting to the hospital. We actually had people speeding up alongside us, cell phones out the window, people taking video, trying to snap pictures. So we were all in unmarked vehicles. So the other officers and the other two unmarked were trying to keep those cars at bay from us.
And during that portion of the transport, any change in Mr. Reinking's behavior?
No, ma'am.
And so once you get to the hospital, can you describe that interaction with him? Were you present while he was at the hospital receiving treatment?
Yes, ma'am. So myself and Officer Feeney arrived. We pulled into where normally the ambulances would park. I think at that point we backed into the parking space, which time I exit the passenger side, open the door. I direct Mr. Reinking how to exit the vehicle, since he is so tall, to slide over to my side, put his legs out, protect his head so he can duck and get out of the vehicle, at which time we entered through the ER door.
And was he compliant with all of those directions?
Yes, ma'am.
And while at the hospital, can you describe what, if any, treatment he received?
So when we were at the hospital, the nurses came in, immediately started doing the initial triage, and I think that's just, temperature, blood pressure check, and everything like that. I think they started the process of trying to retrieve urine from him, but at that time he couldn't use the restroom. So I think they subsequently ended up having to cath him. I remained in the room, but at that time, since my male partners were in there, I turned my head to give him some privacy of that.
And did he have any injuries that were treated at the hospital?
The main thing I recall is he had a laceration on one of his toes. He had on Converse tennis shoes, but I can't recall exactly which foot it was.
And was that something that occurred during transport, or was that present from the time that you encountered him?
That was present from the time I retrieved him out of the SUV.
And can you describe Mr. Reinking's interaction with the medical staff during that treatment? Were there any issues?
There were no issues. He listened. He complied to everything that they said. I think when they would give him water or something, he would drink the water. But yeah, he was completely compliant to everything that they asked of him.
And do you recall if Mr. Reinking said anything or spoke to anyone other than being responsive to the nurses' questions?
No, myself and the officers, we were trying to not engage in conversation with him. So this was approaching towards probably the end of our shift. We were with him for quite some time. So I think we were just interacting, trying to figure out, because we knew we were going to be passed, to let our families know what was going on and so forth. And he would kind of follow us, whoever was talking. But the only comment that he made that was out of the ordinary to me was he asked, why did they ask if I had tattoos?
And when you say, he said, why did they ask if I had tattoos?
Yes, ma'am.
Were those his exact words, or did he give context to that question?
I want to say, and I don't recall 100%, but I thought he was referring to the media. Why did the media say I had tattoos? And we couldn't figure out where that came from, because we had never received any type of instructions or description of him having tattoos.
And when he's at the hospital, is there a TV on with media reports while he's being treated, or is he kept isolated from
He was isolated.
Like that? If I can have just one moment. Thank you, Officer Corman. I don't have anything else.
Thank you.
Ross?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Could you please state your name for the record?
Sergeant Colin Feeney.
And I'm sorry, I said officer earlier, and that was a
That's
mistake. Sergeant Feeney, could you please spell your first and last name?
First name is Colin, last name is Feeney.
And were you involved in the transport of Travis Reinking on April 23rd of 2018?
I was.
And were you with Officers Corman and Officers Penny?
I was. Officer Corman was riding with me that day.
And can you describe that transport?
Well, it's not something that happens very often. This is the first of its kind in my career in the department. We were notified that they had captured the subject on Sprucedale. We made our way over to the location. He was, I believe it was the specialized investigations units, maybe a gang unit, had captured him in the wood line. They requested us, at the time I was assigned to the South A-Flex burglary unit. We had unmarked cars that were available for transport because we were running a 2-person car. We were deemed the transport car.
And can you describe what you mean by running a 2-person car?
There was 2 officers riding in the car, and we didn't have enough vehicles, so we had 2 people riding in one car.
And who was with you in that vehicle?
Officer Ricky Corman.
And you said that it was an unmarked vehicle, is that correct?
That is correct.
And I know you said that this was the first time that it had happened in your career. How long have you been with the police department?
11 years.
And how long have you been a sergeant?
A year today.
And prior to that, where were you assigned?
South A detail on the flex unit.
And was that for the entire 11 years before?
No, I worked South C detail and patrol, South C detail on flex, South A detail on flex, which was tasked as a burglary unit. At the time of this incident, it was still a residential burglary unit.
And in your job as a police officer with Metro National Police Department, did you receive any training on dealing with persons that suffer from mental illnesses?
We do. In our basic recruit class at the Metro Police Academy, we call it Mobile Crisis. This is the mental health co-op, comes out and puts on an instruction block, ways to identify individuals that are going through mental crisis that may have some sort of diagnosed or undiagnosed mental illness. One of the exercises, they bring a headset out that has recordings on it, some positive, some negative voices, but it's multiple voices at the same time. They put it on you listen to it, they try to have a conversation with you. And the purpose of the exercise is to demonstrate that if someone is in some sort of psychosis, such as schizophrenia, that if they're hearing all these voices, it's very hard for them to have a controlled, focused thought. And if you're asking them questions, they may not be answering you, they may be answering the other voices they're hearing. So the purpose of that is to help us identify if someone is having those issues.
And you said that some of the voices are positive, right?
That is correct.
Because the training is telling you that it's not always negative, is that right?
That is correct.
And during your 12 years, have you encountered people that suffer from mental illnesses?
I have.
And have you specifically encountered people that suffer from schizophrenia?
I have, multiple times.
And what are some of the signs that you've been trained to look for and or that your experience has shown you?
Both through training and experience, what I've come to recognize, they will have divided attention. It'll be hard for them to have a controlled thought, a focused thought, to be able to carry on a conversation. They may start a sentence, interrupt it, talking to someone else, looking away with their body language, facing their body in a different direction away from you. You may have to ask the same question multiple times to get an answer. As simple as a yes or no answer can sometimes be very difficult. You'd have to ask that multiple times.
And what about following directions?
Typically, it's a long process to get someone to follow directions, especially if they're in a state of psychosis, because they have multiple thoughts, multiple trains of thought going on at the same time. Recently, I had a call with an individual who was schizophrenic and hadn't been on his medication for months. He actually called for help. We got out there and he was yelling at someone who wasn't there that not to burn down his house. And then he was yelling at someone else not to kill his mother. And then he was yelling at them if they killed his mother, he would kill them. And it took us about 30 minutes to get him calm enough so we could go with the correct action of getting mental health involved with the mobile crisis and transporting him out there.
Okay. And you've described kind of that initial response of going to Sprucedale. During that transport from Sprucedale to South Precinct, can you describe your interaction with Mr. Reinking?
Yes, when I arrived at the scene, Officer Corman she was riding on the front passenger seat. I was driving. I had to move some equipment out of the back seat so we would have adequate room. So I removed my equipment, moved in another vehicle. Officer Corman went to where SID had Mr. Reinking in custody and walked him back to the vehicle. Anytime before someone gets in a police car, it's a good practice and it's highly encouraged that you would search anyone that is transferred custody to you. So you would do a cursory search of them again, make sure there's nothing, no weapons, nothing that was missed by someone else, just for officer safety.
Not saying that anybody would miss anything, but
absolutely,
just in case.
Absolutely. So he came back to the car. Officer Corman and I did a quick pat down, search of him, make sure he didn't have anything on him. Asked him to sit in the car. He sat in the car. He's a tall individual. The vehicle I was driving was a 2011 Impala with a partition in the back. There's not a whole lot of leg room. in there. So some people had a lot of difficulty getting in and out.
Would you say that it's a fairly cramped space for someone his size?
Yes, absolutely.
And did he have any difficulty or react in any way when the pat down was done?
He was very compliant. He didn't move. He didn't resist. He didn't pull away. He stood there. He followed all directions that we gave him. We got him in the back of the car. At one point, we were called to get a pic before we left the scene to have a picture taken, sent to the public information officer so they could make that readily available for the media. So we stopped, opened the door, we were able to get a picture. We asked him to look in our direction. He did so.
So you actually stopped the vehicle, someone got out of the vehicle.
Yes, Officer Corman and I both got out of the vehicle, opened the back door, had him look at us so we could take a picture.
And was that picture taken with a camera or?
This is taken with a phone.
The new camera, which is the cell phone.
That is correct.
And you said that he was actually given a direction to look towards the camera and he complied with that and a photograph was taken.
That is correct.
And did he say anything or do anything at that time?
He did not.
And so then you get back in the car and what happens next?
We ran a convoy to South Precinct. We were instructed to take him to South Precinct. So we ran a convoy to South Precinct, being in a neighborhood where he was captured. Everyone's on Facebook Live, word's getting out, there's cars coming in. We wanted to get him away from the scene, get him to a secure facility where we could determine the next step on what we were going to do.
And were there any issues getting him from the car into the building of South Precinct?
Not at all. I pulled my car up close to the back door of the precinct, asked him to step out of the car. He willingly got out. He walked inside with us. We didn't have to carry him. We didn't have to give him much of a direction other than point an arm. We're going this way. We're going to go to this door. We're going to walk in here. We're going to get in this room, have a seat in this chair. I think Officer Penny went and got a bottle of water for him because he said he was thirsty. So we got him a bottle of water. We weren't at South Precinct very long. We were instructed. We were there maybe 5-10 minutes before we were instructed that we need to take him to Metro General Hospital, Mary Hospital. We had a representative from the Sheriff's Department that we work closely with had called ahead to General and put him on lockdown, so there wouldn't be any ambulances showing up. We got back in, and then we left precinct. We got in the vehicle.
And so all of this kind of coordination that's happening between the sheriffs and the hospital and the police department, are there communications where it's not people talking to Mr. Reinking, but people talking around him about what's happening next?
Yes.
And it's within earshot of him, is that correct?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a big case. There was, precinct commanders there, lieutenants, captains. There's, every person that you could imagine that wants to make sure it's going as smoothly as possible and we don't run into issues.
And maybe tensions might be a little high, is that correct?
That's an important case. We want to make sure we're handling everything correctly.
Did Mr. Reinking have any reaction to kind of all of those conversations going around him?
That time he didn't really speak. He was very attentive to everything that was going on. He looked around, made eye contact when someone was speaking. He would look in their direction.
So as you are speaking with other people, he is looking at you when you're speaking and looking at the other person,
certainly,
kind of as if he's following the conversation.
Yes.
And can you describe that experience of leaving South Precinct and going to the hospital?
After we were told to take him to the hospital, we had been in a room in South Precinct that's maybe the size of the judge's bench, a little bit bigger. I said, hey, we're going to get back in the car. We're going to go to the hospital. He had an injury to his foot, and being outside for several days, it was going to require medical clearance before booking would take him, which is it's a common practice if anyone has any medical issues that has to be addressed before they go into booking. We asked him, we went back out to the car, directed him to the car, went to the car without issue, didn't have to force him, didn't have to use any force whatsoever, maybe lightly holding his arm to make sure he was going the right direction. As we were pulling out of the secured gate, there was a large media presence. We were trying to run a convoy to, being the high profile case that it was. One of the issues we ran into as soon as the secured gate opened, we were swamped by cameras. They got in between myself, the car in front of me, and the car behind me. We had to use lights and sirens to get going, to get around them. Ran lights and sirens all the way to the hospital. Had people pulling up next to us on the interstate, taking pictures as we're driving down the interstate. Made it all the way to General Hospital. Media was there waiting on us. Hospital was locked down. Sheriff's Department met us outside, and we walked into the hospital, or directed him into the hospital. Nurses had a room ready for him. and brought him in.
And can you describe Mr. Reinking's demeanor during all of that you've described, of being swarmed by media and having cars pulling up and his picture being constantly taken?
He never said a word. I was focusing on driving, so I wasn't, turning around looking at him, but most I could tell he was just soaking it in. So.
And once you arrived at the hospital, can you describe what, if anything, occurred?
We went into can't recall the room number. You go in the emergency room bay, and it's the first, you make almost a complete U-turn. You go into that triage room they have there. We got him up on a gurney, had a pair of leg irons or shackles, whatever you want to call them. They're long handcuffs with a long chain. Put him on his ankles, that way he's not a flight risk. And hospital's locked down. We've got multiple officers in there. We got sheriffs in there helping us out. To help the medical staff, they request we take the handcuffs off. So we allowed him to not have handcuffs on, but we left the shackles on him so he wouldn't be able to run. ID showed up, or Technical Investigation Services. His old name was ID, we still call him that. They arrived, removed his clothes. He had, I believe, a maroon shirt, jeans. He was soaking wet, and I don't know if they were Chuck Taylor's All-Stars, but he had canvas shoes on, and one of his toes his foot had a pretty severe laceration that the medical staff advised they're going to have to stitch up. I noticed as they took the clothes off of him that he had a burn mark that is consistent with a 223 or 556 cartridge casing on the top of his foot. Familiar with that burn mark because in our training I've been burned by brass before, and it's identical to the size of it.
And you said that he had an injury to his foot that had to be stitched up.
That is correct.
Were you present when he received those stitches?
I was in the room almost the entire time we were at the hospital. I was in the room with him.
And did they give him any type of, I guess,
A local anesthetic?
And was that done by a needle?
Yes.
So he actually got a shot?
Sure. I don't know if it's like actual shot. It's, numbing agent to put stitches in.
Okay. But they used a syringe and a needle to inject him with something?
Yes.
Did he have any reaction whatsoever to having that done?
I mean, kind of like anyone that you get a little shot and kind of, oh, hey, I got a little shot. Nothing more than that.
But is he saying anything in protest, reacting in any way?
No, they asked him, some basic questions like, medical history, had any surgeries. I think he said a hand or wrist injury that he broke on a dirt bike accident or motorcycle accident. He was very forthcoming with them, answered all their questions without hesitation.
So they're asking him not just, put your hand up, Mr. Reinking, move your leg. They're actually asking him like the normal, you go to the hospital and they've got that list of questions on the computer that they have to ask you before they can go to the next step. And he's able to answer those questions.
Yes.
And you just gave an example of they asked him about prior injuries and he gave a complete answer of a very specific instance. Is that right? Could you describe his interaction with the nurses? Was there anything abnormal about it?
He was very polite. He, nothing out of the ordinary. He was, if they asked him a question, he answered it. It was very cordial to him. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Same with us. He was like, yes, sir. No, sir.
Did he seem in distress in any way?
Not at all.
And while you're at the hospital, what, if any, other procedures are done on Mr. Reinking?
So before they can be released from the hospital, they do, I'm not a medical professional, some sort of blood panel. And part of that is they have to get a urine sample. They gave him an IV. They gave him multiple bags of saline. They said he was pretty dehydrated. We had given him a bottle of water earlier. He had another bottle of water. I think they gave him some orange juice or some sort of juice, just I guess his blood sugar for something,
so they
whatever they did.
Insert an IV and he has multiple bags of IV fluids. And any abnormal interaction to any of that?
Not at all. Like I said, he had to produce urine before he could leave. We tried a few times.
Can you describe that process of what you mean by tried a few times?
So after ID collected his clothes for the investigation portion of it, they were issued it's just a generic kind of a paper gown, like scrubs sort of thing, but not cloth, just disposable gown. He was wearing that. To produce urine, we were going to have him try to urinate in a collection device. We sat there, tried to get him to go, couldn't go. A few minutes went by.
I guess, what do you mean by tried to get him to go?
Tried to get him to urinate on his own.
Okay.
I think the second time we tried, I've got little boys. Well, they're not little anymore, but I've got 2 boys. One of the things we did to help them was turn the faucet on, get some running water, try to, get the mind to think that it has to go. I turned it on. I said, hey, it works for my kids. Let's see if that'll help. And he chuckled, and he's like, well, we can try. That ended up being unsuccessful. After a while, we can't sit there all day waiting for it. So we advised the nurses I think that was the only time I stepped out of the room, was to advise the nurses he was unable to urinate. So they retrieved a Foley catheter and inserted it into his urethra and collected the urine that way.
And was he compliant with that entire process?
He was very compliant. He winced a little bit with the catheter going in, as would be expected.
As would be expected.
But yeah, he was compliant. He understood everything that was happening. They explained everything to him, and he understood what was going on.
And did Mr. Reinking say anything to you or the other officers while y'all were there at the hospital?
We weren't really having a conversation with him. It's our role in the investigation is not really to talk to him. We were kind of talking amongst ourselves. But at one point during our stay at the hospital, he asked us why the news said he had a tattoo on his arm when he got out of his truck. And up until the point that we had taken him into custody, I don't believe his name had been released to the media. So I don't know where he would have gotten that information.
And were you allowing any media news reports,
No.
I guess, to be heard by him?
Not at all.
And you've described your training and experience with people that suffer from mental illness. Did you have any concerns based off of your interaction with Mr. Reinking that day?
Not at all.
If I can have just a moment. Sergeant, I have a disc that I would ask be handed to you. Do you recognize that disc?
It's my initials and the date that I put on here today.
And can you describe what is located on that disc?
It was the local media had taken footage from there's a parking lot outside the secured back lot of South Precinct, and the media had taken video footage of Mr. Reinking being escorted out of my vehicle by myself and Officer Corman into South Precinct and back to the vehicle.
And so this is not the media swarm that happens when you leave, but there
They're
was
outside.
still media that
They're all lined down the fence. So I couldn't tell you which. Yeah, I couldn't tell you which news agency it was, but.
And Your Honor, at this time I would ask that that disc be entered as the next numbered exhibit, and I have it available digitally to publish to the jury. Sergeant Keeney, if you can describe what is being seen here in this first image.
That is my back. I was wearing a ball cap at the time. Officer Corman is directly to my right, and Mr. Reinking is being escorted out of the back seat. We asked him to get out of the back seat. We didn't have to pull him out. He's a tall individual, so we just made sure he wasn't going to fall out of the car and get injured. At this point, we're escorting him into the building. And that's us escorting him back out to the vehicle. And he's sitting in the vehicle, just as we asked.
And anything unusual at all about your interaction with Mr. Reinking?
Not at all.
Thank you. I don't have anything else.
Wrong.
No, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, Sergeant. Sit down.
Thank you, sir.
This gentleman over appreciates 1-star review of their vaccine.
I think that's why they stopped making it.
Yeah. Go ahead, next.
Judge, the next piece of evidence is going to be a stipulation between the prosecution and the defense with regards to the testimony of Officer Mark Rosenfeld.
All right.
With your permission, Judge, I'll read the stipulation.
That'll be fine.
State of Tennessee versus Travis Reinking. The parties have agreed to the following stipulation. Mark Rosenfeld is an officer with the Metro Nashville Police Department. At the time of this incident, he was a member of the Crime Scene Investigation Division. As part of his duties, he collected DNA swabs on the following items. Number 1, 6 DNA swabs from the Kimber handgun. Number 2, 4 DNA swabs from the rifle magazines. 3, 22 DNA swabs from the Bushmaster rifle. The DNA swabs were packaged and submitted to the Metropolitan Police Department Crime Lab for analysis. The DNA swabs are to be admitted as the next 3 numbered exhibits in the order listed above. So, Judge, the 6 DNA swabs would be Exhibit 29. The 4 DNA swabs from the rifle magazines.
Stipulation would be 29.
Well, we can do that. The stipulation will be 29 then, and then number 30 would be the swabs from the Kimber handgun. Number 31 would be the swabs from the rifle magazines. And then number 32 would be the swabs from the Bushmaster rifle. And I'll tender all those to the court.
Members of the jury, you've heard the stipulation read that, which is, as noted on the stipulation agreement to the parties, that what is contained in the stipulation is true. Like any evidence, and this will be in the jury charge, it'll be added to the jury charge when I charge it at the end of the trial. Like any evidence, you will weigh that evidence and give it what weight and credibility you wish to give it. But I'll explain all that to you. But it just makes things a little bit quicker. You don't have to call the officer in and so on and so forth. All right. Next.
Detective Clare. Sir, could you please tell us your name and spell your first and last name for us?
Philip Clare. It's Phillip Klarer.
By whom are you employed?
Metro Nashville Police Department.
What are your current duties with the police department?
I'm currently assigned to the homicide unit.
In April of 2018, where were you assigned?
At that time, I was at the South Precinct Investigations with the same duties, working homicides.
Okay. Has the homicide unit now been centralized?
It has.
Okay. And so basically doing the same thing, but just in a different framework.
That's correct.
Okay. In April of 2018, particularly April the 22nd of 2018, did you become involved in an investigation concerning an incident that had occurred at the Waffle House?
I did.
On Murfreesboro Road.
I was.
When were you first advised of the incident?
That early morning hours, I was notified by my sergeant to respond to that scene.
Okay. Do you recall approximately when? Was it before daylight, after?
It was before daylight.
And did you respond?
I did.
And was that location, that Waffle House, pardon me, in your precinct that you were working at the time?
It was, yes. It was within the South Precinct on Murfreesboro Road.
And the reason I say that is, were you familiar with it at that particular Waffle House?
Actually, that was a new location. I didn't realize that there was a Waffle House there until I got there for the first time.
I was going to say, had you ever been there before?
I've never been there before.
This particular call?
No.
And so, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of great detail about your involvement, but when you arrived, were there other officers already there?
There were.
And sort of briefly set the stage of when you arrived, what did you do?
When I arrived, I was briefed by my supervisor, my sergeant. Several patrol officers were already on the scene. They had established a perimeter around the Waffle House. My sergeant had told us what we had going on there. He then directed myself and another detective to go speak with a witness.
Okay, and who was your sergeant at that time?
Trip Sowell.
All right, and was there also a Sergeant Polk there?
He was.
And as time went on, were lieutenants, captains, and above showing up?
Yes, they were.
All right. So, with your duties, and briefly go into this, of interviewing witnesses, did you leave the location to go speak to witnesses at the hospital?
We did.
Right. When you say we, who?
Myself and Detective Summerall.
Okay. Since we expect Detective Summerall to testify, I may not sort of have the jury have to hear it twice. So, but did you and he go to the hospital, Vanderbilt Hospital?
Yes, we did.
And who did you speak to there?
We first spoke with James Shaw.
Okay. And was, pardon me, anyone else at Vanderbilt Hospital that you were able to speak to that early morning?
No, not at that time.
All right. after speaking with Mr. Shaw, did you leave the hospital and go on about other duties?
Correct. We went back to the scene after that.
And so about what time frame are we talking about now when you were back at the scene?
That's after daylight, so I would say between around 6 or 7 in the morning at that time.
And again, if at some time Detective Summerall and you split up, let me know. But when you say we, is it still you and Detective Summerall?
Yeah, me and Detective Summerall.
Okay, so how long were you at the Waffle House?
We stayed there for a majority of the morning as we were processing this, or our ID units were processing the scene and trying to gather further evidence from the scene.
And did you go to any other location after the processing of the scene?
Not that morning.
Now, on the next day and the days thereafter, did you continue to be involved in this investigation?
I was.
It was one of your duties or responsibilities to obtain DNA swabs.
They were.
Okay, and you referenced Mr. James Shaw and interviewing him that first time, the morning of April the 22nd. Did you obtain a DNA swab from him at that time?
Yes, we had called Mr. Shaw to South Precinct, sort of to do a formal interview with him, and we did collect a DNA sample from him at South Precinct.
Okay. Voluntarily?
Correct.
Mr. Shaw's part. All right, if I could have a document, item passed out. Detective Clare, you're being handed an item. I'd ask if you could look at the packaging and the information on it and see if you recognize that as being a DNA swab.
It is. I collected the DNA, packaged it, and sealed it, and initialed with the date and my initials on it.
All right, I ask that be the next numbered exhibit. Did you also collect a DNA sample from a person who became known to you as Travis Reinking?
I did.
And is that individual here in the court today? And if so, could you identify him by what he's wearing?
He's seated with defense counsel wearing a blue button-up shirt.
All right, does the record reflect that he has indicated Mr. Reinking? Do you recall when you obtained the DNA sample from Mr. Reinking?
I think it was the day after we got the one from Mr. Shaw. I think it was the 24th. He was incarcerated, and we went to the jail to obtain that DNA sample.
All right. And was that done pursuant to a search warrant issued by a judge of record here in this county?
It was.
All right. Yes, that be passed up. I say a judge of record, a judge in this county.
Correct.
Okay. You're being handed another item. And does that appear, once you've had a chance to look at it, to be the DNA swab obtained from Mr. Reinking pursuant to the search warrant?
It is. I packaged this, again, sealed it with the date and my initials on it.
All right, does that be the next numbered exhibit? Had you obtained DNA swabs from individuals in the past?
I have.
Is there a pretty common process of obtaining those?
Yes, I think every detective will have their own way, but yes.
Okay. So, when I ask you about obtaining the swabs from Mr. Reinking,
okay,
you said he was in the jail, basically.
Correct.
For a better term, they all have different names now. But tell us about that. Did you go into where he was housed? Was he brought out?
Yes, we went to the Davids County Sheriff's Office. We were taken back to not necessarily the cell he was housed in, but what I would call like a supervisory area. And he was brought to us by sheriff's deputies.
Okay. When he was brought there and you saw him, what was his appearance or demeanor?
He was very calm, just as though you would have seen anybody else. There was nothing. He didn't appear to be upset. He was very calm and cooperative.
Okay. And would this have been on the 24th of April?
It was.
You recall approximately what time?
I want to say it was just afternoon, maybe 1 o'clock, 12:30, 1 o'clock.
explain the process that you use when advising someone that you're going to take their DNA swab.
I just tell them exactly what I'm going to do, that it's a very non-intrusive collection, just to open their mouth. I'm going to take some swabs, such as like, it's just a elongated Q-tip, and I'm just going to rub it on the inside of their cheeks. And I informed him that I had a search warrant to do so.
Okay. And did you explain that to Mr. Reinking in those?
I did.
Right. Did he make any comment?
He was very, like I said, he was very cooperative. He said, okay. I unpackaged the swabs. He opened his mouth and I swabbed, and that was it. I gave him a copy of the search warrant. He was very cooperative.
It sounds like a procedure that would not have taken very long.
Not long at all, sir.
Those are the only questions I have about this part of the process.
Good afternoon, Detective Clear.
Hello.
So, the morning you got called in, I guess April 22nd, 2018, you said you went to the hospital and spoke with Mr. James Shaw Jr. Is that correct? And you took a statement from him at that time.
I did.
That one was not video or audio recorded.
Correct.
But you did a report of the substance of that statement, correct?
Correct.
And during that interview, you asked him what happened.
Right.
And he gave you his version of what happened, correct?
Correct.
And you asked him to tell you everything he knew at the time.
Yes.
Absolutely. So then you went back on April 25th, 2018, 2018, and you spoke with James Shaw Jr. again at the same time you got his DNA.
Correct.
All right. That one was video and audio recorded, correct?
Yes.
And just like before, you asked Mr. James Shaw Jr. to kind of fully explain and tell you everything that had happened at the Waffle House on the 22nd, correct?
Correct.
And just like you had asked him previously at the hospital, that included anything that Mr. Reinking may have said during the interaction.
Correct.
All right. And isn't it true that, as you stated here, that the statement Mr. James Shaw Jr. gave you on the 25th matched his statement that he gave you on the 22nd?
Right. As far as I recall, yes.
Right. And specifically on the 25th, you recall you asked him multiple times, what did Mr. Reinking say during your interactions with him at the Waffle House?
Yes.
You asked him, what did he say, both inside the Waffle House that you heard and outside the Waffle House that you heard, correct?
Correct.
And isn't it in fact true that during that interview, that on two different occasions that Mr. James Shaw Jr. told you that it wasn't anything racial?
I don't remember him saying anything about it being racial.
All right. So if you had the opportunity to review the audio statement, you think that would refresh your recollection?
Yeah. I mean, I don't remember him saying anything that Mr. Reinking said anything about anything being racial.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Okay.
But specifically, do you recall Mr. James Shaw Jr. telling you that Mr. Reinking didn't say anything racial?
That I said he didn't say anything racial?
Do you recall James Shaw Jr. telling you during the interview that Mr. Reinking did not say anything racial?
I don't recall. I don't recall if he said those exact words, but I don't remember him. I thought you were saying, did he say he said something racial? I don't remember him saying that.
Okay. And it would help you to review that portion of the interview to refresh your recollection on
I mean, sure.
Okay. Your Honor, can we take a brief recess and allow the witness to refresh his recollection?
Judge, what I'm hearing is the officer is asking, yes.
It's getting close to kind of the mid-afternoon recess anyway, so we're going to go ahead and do that and allow the detective to hear a little bit of this interview to see if it refreshes his memory on anything. Please keep in mind, you did not discuss anything about the trial case. Keep your thoughts to yourself and remain open-minded. We'll get you back in here in about 15 minutes. Did you say you had it queued up, or did you need to get it queued up?
I believe we're ready. What I mean by that is it worked.
Quiet, please.
So it's plugged in. I think it's coming up on the screen. I don't know what the audio is going to do. I don't know how loud it's going to be when I start. You want to answer the video? That's it. All right. Okay.
Told us that all you remember was one customer. Have you remembered anything else? What he might have said, or no, what the exact curse words were? He was just like, let me go, let the gun or something like that. That's what you were like? Yeah, it was before that. Was he saying anything when he was shooting? No. I didn't get anything, but then, you know, I don't know. At that point in time, it's just like, what to do. Do you remember what he was saying to you? The words he used? I think you said he was cussing like, and you were like, why are you cussing me? You're the one doing this. Just motherfucker or something like that. I don't think it was anything racial. Yeah. That I heard. I don't. Then again, I was just trying to get the gun. I completely learned to focus on getting the gun away. But I don't think it was anything racial, but he did say like motherfucker and fuck you. And like, I know he said fuck you when we were outside. But that's when I thought he had handguns. Like I said, I went this way, and he went that way. And I was thinking.
Detective, did that refresh your recollection?
It did. Thank you. And so, what will be the question when he comes back, just so make sure that he does in fact understand what you're asking?
Yes. So, Detective, during your interview on April 25th, 2018, with James Shaws Jr., did he state to you 2 times that he did not recall Travis Reinking saying anything, or he did not believe Travis Reinking said anything racial?
That's correct.
Okay.
Any issues?
No.
I mean, you may have some redirect, I understand that, but as far as this is one issue is concerned, everything's on target. Okay.
I believe the foundation was set to ask the question.
All right. We'll take about 10-minute recess.
All right, that wraps up the officers that were involved with taking Travis into custody and being on the scene. There were some other officers that testified, but I scrubbed through theirs and I didn't find that their testimony really added much further than all the ones that we've already seen. We're going to move on to a forensic pathologist now. This is going to be the last testimony we watched today. And he's going to give some insights into the injuries endured by the victims. I know that we've discussed a little bit about, where these injuries really, I mean, obviously they came from the gun, but they just seemed so extreme compared to what you would expect or think would come from a rifle that Travis shot with. Other people have testified that the injuries really resembled injuries from war, from being at war, which is insane to imagine, legs dismembered off of people's bodies essentially and things like that from one shot is excessive. So it's going to be interesting to hear his analysis on the injuries endured by the victims based on what we've heard so far from the survivors.
Dr. Deering, could you please state your full name for the record?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Tom Deering. Of course, Thomas, Thomas. Last name is D as in dog, Eering.
Dr. Deering, could you please describe where you're employed and what your position is there?
I work for a company called Forensic Medical Management Services, and we contract with Metro Nashville to be their medical examiner. So I'm an MD. I'm also a forensic pathologist, and my title currently is Deputy Chief Medical Examiner for Metro Nashville.
And can you describe basically what a medical examiner does?
I tell people my job's easy. I always answer 2 questions. What's the cause of death? And there's lots and lots of choices. And what's the manner of death? And there's basically 5 choices, and you're familiar with those: homicide, suicide, natural, accident, and we even have a category where we just can't figure that out. We call it undetermined.
And how long have you worked as a forensic pathologist?
Well, here in this office, it'll be 21 years at the end of this month.
Can you estimate how many autopsies that you have performed in that 21 years?
I just tell people I average more than 250 a year, and if you do 20 years times 250, I'm at 5,000. So I've done more than 5,000 autopsies.
Your Honor, at this time, I would tender Dr. Deering as an expert in forensic pathology.
No objection. All right, Mr. Jury, Dr. Deering will be classified as a forensic pathologist for purpose of his testimony and whatever opinions he deems appropriate.
Dr. Deering, could you generally describe the process of completing an autopsy?
When a body comes to us, it comes in a body bag. So we'll take it out, we'll unzip it, we'll take a picture of it as is, take whatever photos we need. The body then is unclothed if that's necessary. We'll clean up the body. Sometimes first we're looking at injuries before we do all that. Occasionally there's some evidence that we collect at that point. But once that's done, the bodies are all cleaned up, and we take another set of pictures with them completely without clothes and cleaned up. And we can take x-rays at that point to see if there's something metal inside the body that we're looking for. Broken bones, things like that. Once we're satisfied at that point, and we often make diagrams of the injuries that we're seeing, we'll open up the body. So that's kind of our physical exam, and we have a way of opening up the body that we see all the organs, right where they are, including the brain. We can remove them all, we weigh them, we dissect them. We look for evidence of injury, we look for evidence of illness, and disease states. We'll collect specimens, like for toxicology. So blood, urine, vitreous fluid, which is from the eye, are typical things we collect, and send it off to another lab looking for medications and specifically illicit drug use and alcohol. I can collect evidence, and typically what that means is that if I'm looking for bullets, I can collect the bullet at that point, and we'll retain that so it can be put into evidence. If I need to, I can take little bits of organs and send them to a lab that will make a glass slide out of it, and I can use my microscope. On trauma cases, typically I don't need to do that, but that's something else I can do. So either on that day, if I have enough information, or once I get the toxicology back and glass slides, I come to a conclusion and I have an opinion, and I answer those two questions. Now, really, everything I just told you answers the first question: what's the cause of death? What I also get is a story, and it's very important, because interpreting whether something is natural, or whether it's an accident, or whether it's a homicide or a suicide, depends on what happened. So similar injuries may go one way or may go the other. So it's very important that I get a story of what happens. And then I answer the second question. I'll sign the death certificate. I'll put that on the autopsy report, and then the report with all my findings and my diagrams and the tox then gets published.
And many times, if the autopsy is related to a criminal investigation, do you meet with the detectives and/or review any other evidence related to the case prior to testifying?
That happens very frequently. Sometimes frequently they come to the autopsy and we can discuss things. We may talk about it over the phone later. We may have meetings, if there's things to be figured out or trying to put together.
And is it common that in autopsies connected to criminal investigations that you might review additional photos, or if there's video of an incident kind of in connection with your trial testimony prior to testifying?
Oh, yes, if I can get scene photos, and sometimes there's videos, that can often help. My job and what I'm trying to do with the autopsy is what we call clinical pathologic correlation. It means I'm trying to find the injuries, put it to what happened at the scene, and see if I can fit those together and make a logical conclusion of the events that happened.
Dr. Deering, were you involved and present for the autopsy of Joe Perez Jr., Torian Charles Sonderland, Aquila Jamal Da Silva, and Diebony Lachey Groves, all from the 4/22/2018 incident at the Waffle House located at 3571 Murfreesboro Pike in Antioch, Tennessee?
Yes.
And in preparation for trial and through the criminal process, did you review the surveillance video from the Waffle House and from that shooting?
Yes.
And I am going to begin by asking you specifically about the autopsy of Joe Rene Perez Jr. And did you create a report related to that autopsy?
Yes.
And I'm going to ask that a copy of the report be passed to you. Which, Dr. Deering, do you also have your actual file with you for purposes of giving testimony today?
Yes. All right, so this is all of those sheets that I told you about that go into the autopsy. I even did some microscopic work. I put the skin from one of the gunshot wounds in for looking at with my microscope. It has the tox report, and the cover sheet we call the report of investigation by the county medical examiner. And it's sort of a summary sheet. It sort of tells the story of why we're involved with this case, and then it'll state the cause and manner of death that was decided on this case. And this is an accurate copy of Joe Perez Jr.
Your Honor, at this time I'd ask that that be introduced as the next numbered exhibit. And I also have a 4-page document of diagrams that I would ask be handed to the witness.
Thank you.
Dr. Deering, do you recognize those documents?
Yeah, these are 4 diagrams that I made. These are mine, my work product from the autopsy on Joe Perez.
And Your Honor, at this time I would ask that those 4 diagrams be made the next number exhibit. They have been pre-marked with A, B, C, and D. And Your Honor, at this time I would ask permission to publish those to the jury.
All right, thank you.
Dr. Deering, this is what has been introduced as 41A, which is the full body chart for the autopsy of Joe Perez Jr. The next image is just a zoom in of that same body chart. This is 42B, which is the side view of the full body diagram. And again, there is a zoomed in image of the injury that is indicated in that diagram. And then 41C, which is, I guess, a head, multiple head, 6 different head views diagram. And again, a zoomed in image of the injury in that diagram. And then the fourth is 41D, which is a, I guess, top skull view diagram. And again, a zoomed in image of that diagram. Dr. Deering, I'm going to ask that you describe the injuries to Joe Perez Jr. And as we go through your testimony, if any of these diagrams assist your testimony and would aid in explaining any of the injuries to the jury, if you'll just direct me and I will publish that diagram as you testify.
If you'll start putting up the one with the head diagrams, the 6 head diagrams. Joe Perez, I described 4 gunshot wound paths, meaning there's an entrance and it either goes to bullet fragments or it exits. and that constitutes a path. So one wound may have 2 gunshot wounds, an entrance and an exit. So I'm just going to say I've described 4 paths. And they, just a quick summary, they have something in common is that they go in the same direction for the most part. The main thing that they share is they come from back to front of the decedent. So the bullets come from behind him and go forward through his body. I've labeled these and there's letters, and they're just the order in which I describe them. I can't say for sure, even having watched the video, that I can tell you this one came before this one and this one came, next. I've just described 4. In the video, the shots are fairly close together, so it would be hard to delineate which of those. And I'm going to start with the one that I called A over the top of the head. It's this one that looks like a really long carrot. And this is where I've kind of circled it. It enters back there, and it tunnels along the top of the head. So it's going from back to front and coming forward. And in so doing, it fractures the skull and it injures the brain. So the other thing that's about it, and many of the wounds here, all of these wounds, particularly on x-ray, and once I get in and look at them, have a pattern that kind of tells me something about the weapon. And that these are that when the bullets hit the target, they break into a lot of tiny little pieces. I mean, they're not all tiny, but there's a lot of tiny ones. And you can see that right away on x-ray. And when you get inside, the injuries on the inside are way more significant than the diameter of the bullet going through, which typical things like a handgun, typically, it's the diameter of the bullet that injures as it goes through. But with rifle wounds, something that's a high velocity gunshot wound, the injuries on the inside are often much larger than just the path of the bullet. And we see a lot of these little pieces, and we're going to see that pretty much in most of the wounds that I'm going to describe. So that's the first one. So then I'd like to go, well, let's go to the one to the top of the skull that shows the cranium. And really, I'm just showing that although this hits the top, the energy and the force of this actually fractures the bottom. So this is the top of the skull. This is with this one here is with the brain removed. So this is what the brain sits on, and there's significant fractures even on what we call the skull base. So this is a devastating wound. I don't have pictures of it, but I have described that the brain is lacerated too. It's torn significantly from that one. So can we go to the full body diagram, please? I've said that there's 4 wounds. I just did the first one. The second one is on the left side of the neck. I labeled it B. And I'm going to turn a little bit towards you and just sort of point in this area. It's here. And it goes from back to front. And it's going to come out E. And I'm going to go to that diagram in a minute. I just wanted to show you so I didn't skip it. The next one is gunshot wound C. And it's kind of the posterior left shoulder area. And that bullet goes from back to front. And there's going to be wounds associated with that. It hits the scapula, the shoulder blade, and it fractures it. It hits several ribs in the back, and it ends in lots of these little fragments. And you can actually see them on x-ray. The fourth one, and again, remember, I'm going to go back to B, is this one D, and it's on the right side. It's a lot different than the other 3. In my opinion and experience, this bullet hit something first. The bullet started to break. Sorry, I'm going to sip one. It hit something first, and at that point, it becomes shrapnel. A lot of little pieces of bullet are now hitting the skin, so it's It's very irregular, and there's a lot of black material that's not present on the other wounds in this. So I was wondering at first if it might be asphalt, and then it hit it and kind of picked it up. In watching the video, there is a black post or a black pole that's in the direction of the bullets, and that's the only thing that I see that it could hit. I don't know if the pole is wrapped with something, but there's black material that's embedded in a lot of these wounds, and I think I recovered some of the fragments.
And it's that pole that you've described, was that a handicap sign that was in the parking lot?
I don't remember what it was. I just was looking for something black, and as we looked around, there was a pole that was black, and I may be wrong about that. But can we go now to the side picture? So here it is from the side, and if you look along the left side, that's much better. This very large wound here is the exit wound. That's gunshot wound E. And interestingly, in rifle wounds, this is the kind of wound where it is often typical that the exit is much larger than the entrance. Another, indication of what kind of a weapon we may be dealing with. And this is a very good example of that. The exit is much larger than the entrance. It really just injures a lot of soft tissue in the side of the neck, but those are important structures as well. So this one goes from back to front. There may be some other little directions on it, but what they all have in common is all four of these wounds are coming from behind. You have a devastating wound to the skull, you have a significant wound to the back of the left chest, and an injury to the left neck, and then a shrapnel wound with lots of little pieces that are in there. And that pretty much, I think, summarizes, and I think I've used all the diagrams from Joe Perez's case.
Dr. Deering, you've referenced the rifle wounds in this case. Can you explain a little bit and differentiate it from maybe a handgun, a 9mm, and how the injuries are different?
The speed of the bullet makes a big difference. When high velocity first started showing up, they called them exploding bullets because when autopsies were done, it was amazing how much injury was seen inside versus just the small size of the bullet. And I kind of already explained, like with typical handguns, the injuries are the width of the bullet, and sometimes bullets tumble, so they're a little bit wide. But this is a temporary cavity that is created in the tissue, and the injury will extend out that whole cavity. Therefore, we see the larger exits like you see from B to E. That's actually an example of what happens when you see high velocity hitting a body. And there's going to be some other injuries we see in some of the other decedents that will show you this as well.
And if someone is not trained in rifle wounds versus a handgun 9mm wound, would it be easy for them to mistake an exit wound for an entrance wound?
We've seen that before. Yes.
And the conclusion of the autopsy of Joe Rene Perez Jr., can you say what the cause and manner of death is?
In my opinion, the cause of death is multiple gunshot wounds, specifically a rifle, and the manner of death is homicide. Now, I have to tell you, when I say homicide, I mean that it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a murder. They're not synonymous. It may be, but it may not be. That's what you decide. I'm just saying that he died as the result of somebody else's actions, not his own.
Thank you, Dr. Deering. Moving on to Torian Sonderland. I'm going to ask that you be passed a report which, Dr. Deering, I have one last question for Mr. Perez's case. Based off the injuries that he sustained, how long would he have lived?
Well, the injury to the head is devastating. So we're talking seconds to maybe minutes. I would expect him to be immediately unconscious once the head shot is present. I guess I would sum up and say very, very quickly, if not almost immediately.
Thank you. Do you recognize the report that was handed to you?
All right, so this is an accurate copy. It has the report of investigation. It has my autopsy report, the diagram, and the toxicology, all on Torian Sonderland.
Your Honor, I would ask that that document be made the next numbered exhibit.
43.
And I have 3 pages.
Diagram.
The first 2 pages are diagrams. The 3rd page is an X-ray image. Yes, Your Honor. With C being the X-ray image.
Correct.
And these are 2 diagrams that I created for the autopsy on Torian Sanderlin. And this is a portion of one of the x-rays that was taken in that same case.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask that those be introduced. Dr. Deering, I have just placed 43A, which is a full body diagram, on the screen. The next image is a zoomed in image of the head injury that you have denoted on the diagram. And the next image is a zoomed in image of the torso portion of the diagram. We also have the lower body portion. The next image is 43B, which is a side view diagram of the body. And then the last image, which is an X-ray image, is 43C. And again, just as you did with Mr. Perez, as you testify about the injuries to Mr. Sonderlin, if you could just direct me to the diagram that would assist you the most in your testimony.
Let's do to the closer up of the back of the head. Mr. Sonderlin's case is probably the most complicated of the 4. I believe that I've described 7 gunshot wound paths. And again, I'd like to kind of group things together. And some is because I've seen the video and they make sense from things that I've seen. I'm just going to go ahead and start again with a headshot. So we have gunshot wound A, which is right there, and it exits right there. So instead of going over the top, like we saw on the last one, this one is going from the decedent's right to left. Goes across the back of his head. So it fractures the skull and it tears the left side of the back of the brain as it goes through, which makes sense from its location. And its main direction is right to left. So I just kind of wanted to focus on that one. Now, if we could see the full body diagram. There's a cluster of 4 shots around the right chest. In the right back, there's B and C. Here in the front, there is gunshot wound E, which is kind of like right there in the center. and E is going to exit in gunshot wound F, which is right here. And the fourth of those is not in this picture, and we'll get to that in a minute. That's gunshot wound G. I'm going to show you where that is. Gunshot wound G is over here on the right side. So we have 2 in the back right, 1 on the side right, and we have 1 in front. The interesting thing about the 1 in front, it's going the other direction. It's going from the decedent's left to right. The exit is much larger than the entrance, so we've seen a second example of that typifies what we might see in a rifle shot. The other ones all tend to go right to left. And there may be some up and down and forward and back, but that's their main direction, similarly to what we saw in the back of the head. So now we've described 4 shots that go right to left and 1 that's going left to right. If we could go ahead and take a look at that lateral view. And here is gunshot wound G. And you can't see it very well in this picture. I've described up here, I've wrote the word stippling. We've not seen this on any other wound so far. There's little pieces of partially burnt or unburned gunpowder that have abraded, stuck themselves in the skin and made a little mark. You know, they made an abrasion. It means that this shot is closer than all the other shots. And it gives us some information. Now, as a group, so we have these 4 shots from around the side. As a group, we're going to have injuries to multiple things. And let me just read down here what we've got. A lot of them fracture right ribs 5 through 9, so that whole area was hard to sort out what hit what because they all hit the same area. So ribs 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are all fractured by the gunshot wound. And the upper and middle lobes of the right lung are also injured. In addition, there is a laceration to the right side of the diaphragm. So the diaphragm has 2 leaps and the right side is done. There's a lower lobe injury of the right lung, and there's a laceration across the liver and maybe even all the way across to the other side to get the spleen. So you have multiple wounds coming from right to left, and the structures that are in the way are all broken or lacerated. And that includes the right lung, the liver, the diaphragm, and the ribs are all injured. And I found 300 milliliters of blood sitting in that right chest. So that's called a hemothorax.
Dr. Deering, what's significant about finding the 300 milliliters of blood?
It just means that there was certainly passive bleeding from the wounds.
Dr. Deering, what, if anything, can you say about, is there any wound that appears that it occurred before or after any of the other wounds?
From comparing it to the video of when they started, and I can actually see the decedent come from one side, move through the video, and go to the other side. My best approximation of this is the one that goes the other direction is the first one. You can see the decedent come very close, much closer to the shooter in the video, and that's likely this wound right here. So you have, can I stand up for a minute? So if you're perhaps, the viewpoint of the shooter, the decedent starts this way, so the first wound comes this way, and then you can see him turn. Second wound, third wound, fourth wound. So I think these 4 occur in that order. Since those are very early on in the video, and you can hear the shooting start, the wound to the head must come later. And there actually are some other, and there's a wound to the left thigh as well. So talked about the wound to the head. There's also a wound that occurs to the left side, and that also goes from right to left. And just from, again, that seems to be later. I think the cluster of 4 occurs first. I don't know exactly about the others. The decedent may be falling to the ground while shots are still being fired. So that may account for the others. And I think I haven't described one wound yet. If we'll go back to the full body diagram, there's one more wound right here in the neck, and that's D. So, and it goes right to left and front to back. So it's going in here, and it fractures the clavicle and the ribs that are attached to the sternum, and it injures the left lung as well. That's another one that is also going kind of in that right to left pattern. It's not as much as some of the others. So we have head, we have neck, we have 4 to the chest, and we have the left thigh. And I believe that's the 7 wounds that I saw in the video sequence. Is watching, if I'm the shooter, is watching the decedent go from here to here and down to the ground is where he's found. So that's what makes most sense out of these. Certainly the head wound is a devastating wound, but this cluster of wounds to the chest, I can't sort out and say one is more, that they all injured the lungs and the ribs. So they would also all be potentially fatal wounds. The one to the thigh didn't hit any bone, so I don't think that's, let me just double check when I say that. No, it doesn't hit any bone. So that in and of itself is probably not a fatal wound, but I think it's a later wound rather than an earlier wound.
And Dr. Deering, based on the injuries and wounds to Torian Sonderland, is there anything that you can say about how long he would have lived after suffering these 7 gunshot wounds?
Again, particularly because the head wound, he's going to be unconscious immediately, and I'm going to give him again seconds to maybe, some minutes. On chest wounds, I've often seen way more than 300 milliliters of blood. That's almost just the amount that's kind of sitting there in the lungs. So his death may have been fairly immediate. Of course, you can see from the video he moves. So I like my opinion of seconds to maybe a minute or so.
Your Honor, can I verify that the jurors are able to see the images on the screens in the jury box, since we're clearly having issues with the large screen TV? Thank you.
Please let us know if you have any difficulties.
And I don't know if we just need to turn that off. It's a little distracting.
It's got different colors. They're like rainbows.
You got something at the bottom.
Dr. Deering, previously I showed you an X-ray image. And can you describe specifically kind of the difference in the injury that this rifle round has caused versus, again, just comparing it to a 9mm round?
The X-ray pattern, this is the term that's been coined called a leaded snowstorm. So bullet fragments or metal on this particular X-ray will be white. Dense bone is white. Air is more black. So particularly on the right chest, where there were multiple bullets, these represent, fragments. Once the bullets hit, they broke into pieces. This is likely from gunshot wound D, the one that was up there below the neck and went into the left upper chest. This is that that pattern of leaded snowstorm that indicates to me that we may be dealing with a rifle wound, something that's high velocity.
And Dr. Deering, did you establish a cause and manner of death at the completion of the autopsy for Torian Sonderman?
Yes, in my opinion, the cause of death is multiple gunshot wounds, likely rifle, and the manner of death is homicide.
I'm going to ask that you be handed a report.
This is a copy of the report of investigation. It's the autopsy report with a diagram and the diagram that was made by Dr. Randy Tajjan, one of my colleagues, on Aquila da Silva.
And were you present during the autopsy of Aquila da Silva?
Yes, the two of us were doing autopsies in the same autopsy suite.
And there's another doctor that performed this autopsy. Is there a particular reason why?
Well, it's just caseload, trying to finish them, especially with multiple gunshot wounds and the amount of complexity. So, and to finish them as promptly as we could. We split them up. I did 3, and my colleague did the 4th. Oh, the other reason, I'm sorry, there's a better reason. Mr. Da Silva went to the hospital. He was not pronounced dead at the scene. So resuscitation efforts were made, and he may have come in at a different time frame.
And have you reviewed the autopsy that was performed by the other doctor? And have you reviewed, I guess, all of the photographs and everything associated with it and come up with your own conclusion as to the cause and manner of death?
I did, yes.
And did it concur with the other doctor's opinion?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask that the autopsy report of Aquila da Silva be introduced as the next numbered exhibit. And I have 2 documents, the first of which is a diagram, the second of which is an X-ray image.
Yes, and this is a copy of the X-ray from the Aquila da Silva case and a copy of the diagram made by Dr. Tajjan from the same case.
And Your Honor, at this time I would ask that those documents be introduced as the next numbered exhibit. I think 46A and B. Did you already do that?
Yeah, I already.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I have permission to publish them to the jury?
You may.
And Dr. Deering, this is the full body diagram for this autopsy report. Again, there is a zoomed in image of the actual injuries, and then the next image is the X-ray image. As you go through the autopsy of Aquila Jamal da Silva, if you could direct me to which, if any, of these images would assist you in your testimony.
We'll just stay right here. This one's much more straightforward. There's 2 gunshot wounds. They're both up here. So right anterior shoulder, right chest. There were injuries to the upper lobe of the right lung. There were fractures of the right, second, third, and fourth ribs. There was blood inside the right chest. That is from the gunshot, what he labels as A. And the other one injured the top of the right arm bone, the humerus, the right collarbone, and the right scapula, the shoulder blade, and hemorrhages along those wound tracks. So, consistent with where we're seeing them, these are the bones and the structures that were all injured. The main direction is from front to back. They also go from the decedent's right to left and slightly downward. So both of them are kind of parallel wounds. If you would go to the x-ray, what we're seeing on here, we see the leaded snowstorm plus some larger fragments of bullet. It's in that area. That's the fracture of the arm bone that you can actually see on the x-ray. That it's broken. We may not be able to see others.
Which, Dr. Deering, there appears to be a paper clip. Can you explain that?
Yeah, the paper clip is from the hospital. They have marked where an entrance wound is. They put a paper clip on the surface of the skin and took the x-ray so that when you're looking at the x-ray, you can say, oh, there's a wound there. So the paper clip's not inside of him. It was just on top of him when they took this x-ray. So, and that's, you can see the area, it's the right chest. And those are the injuries associated for Aquila da Silva.
And can you tell anything about how close in time those injuries would have occurred to each other?
There's nothing really specifically about them. They're side by side. I sort of assume they came in rapid succession. They're in the same direction. It would be hard to do that if they were separated in time, but I don't really have anything about the autopsy that lets me do that.
And are they consistent with someone being low to the ground at the time that they sustained these injuries?
It's always a hard question to answer. I mean, what I can say for sure, that the shooter was in front because they're coming from front to back. It was, since they go from right to left, you know, so front to back, if I go right to left, if you're kind of from the shooter's perspective, and superior to inferior, a number of things can happen. And it's hard for me to predict both shooter and decedent. If one is a given, I can kind of place the other. If we say the shooter is holding the gun fairly level, then to go downward on the person, they can be ducked this way. If they're up straight, then the shooter is either higher than them or is holding the gun up and pointing downward. And I can't tell either from it. But the question is it consistent with someone being lower? It says, well, it could be, you know, depending on where the shooter is and how he or she is holding the gun.
And in Mr. Da Silva's case, what, if anything, can you say about how long he would have survived after sustaining these injuries?
Well, this is one that the death would ultimately be from bleeding to death. He's not unconscious. He obviously made it to the hospital. They performed some procedures to try to save him. And it wasn't soon enough. So this goes more, you know, minutes to maybe an hour or more. I can't be more precise than that versus being immediate. And obviously it is. There'll be a time of death from the hospital when he was pronounced that you can link back to when the shooting happened and get a pretty precise of how long he lived.
Is either of the gunshot wounds, I guess, more lethal or more devastating than the other?
It's a little hard to say. Certainly the one to the lung is going to bleed significantly, but a fractured arm bone and clavicle and scapula is going to have a fair amount of bleeding as well. So they're both pretty significant.
Would you expect this decedent to at some point have a hard time breathing?
Yes. Well, they mention a word in here. Dr. Tajdan talks about atelectasis, dry tongue, I can't say it, atelectasis of the lung. It just means the lung has started to collapse. And when there's a hole in there, you can get air around the lung. You can also get blood around the lung, and it starts to press on the lung, and it's not able to inflate like normally. So that would be not an unexpected finding in somebody shot in the chest like this, that they would have a hard time breathing eventually.
But Mr. Da Silva, as compared to the other two autopsies that you've testified to, he would have lived a much longer period of time, even up to an hour. Is that correct?
And he did. I mean, he did live longer than the others.
Which I believe on the previous diagram, there was clearly medical intervention that occurred with Mr. De Silva. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what was the cause and manner of death that was determined after the completion of Mr. De Silva's autopsy?
The cause of death by Dr. Tajjan, which I agree with, is gunshot wounds of the torso, and the manner of death is homicide, and the torso, of course, being kind of from the neck to the pelvis.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask that the doctor be passed a report, and then immediately after, I'm going to ask that he be handed a 2-page diagram.
This is the report of investigation, the autopsy report, the tox, but my diagrams are not in this particular copy.
And Your Honor, I'd ask that the autopsy report be introduced as exhibit number 47, I believe.
Yeah.
Dr. Deering, are those 2 documents that have been handed to you, are those the diagrams?
Yes, and these are the diagrams from the autopsy report that I made during the autopsy.
And Your Honor, I would ask that those be made the next numbered exhibit 48A and B.
And the decedent in that case is Diebony Groves.
Dr. Deering, just as before, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at that screen. Dr. Deering, are you able to see the diagram on your screen?
Yes.
And this diagram is the full body view for, again, you've said the autopsy of Diebony Lachey Groves. And there's also a zoomed in image of the injuries to her upper torso. And then your second diagram, which is the side view full body diagram, as well as a zoomed in image of those injuries. If you could just direct me to which, if
Let's
either.
stay with this one.
Thank you.
This decedent also suffered 2 gunshot wounds, A and B. They're side by side or kind of next to each other. They're parallel. And in fact, after describing each entrance, I described the wound path as a collection of both of the 2 of them. There's fractures of left ribs, 6 and 7. The spleen, which sits over on the left side, just under the ribs, that's torn. The left side of the diaphragm is torn. The left lobe of the liver, so the liver's mostly on the right side, but there's a lobe of it that kind of goes over the middle to the left. So the left side of the liver is torn. The colon is injured, so part of the intestine. The pericardium is the sac around the heart. That's torn, and there has been a perforation of the left ventricle of the heart, or a penetrating wound has gone into the heart. And in fact, I recovered a large fragment of the bullet from the aorta, and the aorta itself wasn't hurt, wasn't injured, but I believe this fragment of bullet that hit the left ventricle was pumped by the heart up and out into the aorta, and that's where I recovered it from. And I also recovered some other small fragments. The x-ray in this case shows the leaded snowstorm kind of a picture. And in this particular case, there's no exits. Both the wounds go predominantly the decedent's left to right and injure those structures and organs that are over on the left-hand side. I recovered 100 milliliters of blood from around the heart and 900 milliliters, almost a liter of blood in the left chest. Let's see if there's anything else here. Yeah, and there's some small abrasions of the face that I see on the diagram, but this is more significantly what the major injuries are.
Dr. Deering, you referenced the small abrasions on her face. Would those be consistent with if someone else was struck by a rifle round that was in close proximity to her and her body was on the other side of that?
Well, we've seen a couple of wounds on other decedents that had this shrapnel kind of thing with little pieces. So based on this scenario and story, this could certainly be bits of shrapnel that hit her in the face from someone else receiving a gunshot wound.
And D'Ebony Groves's injuries, what, if anything, can you say about how long she would have survived after sustaining these injuries?
This would go similarly to Mr. Da Silva. The ultimate mechanism of death here is going to be bleeding to death, and she has a significant amount of blood in her left chest. I'm just double checking. Yeah, I think she did not make it to the hospital, so she was dead there on the scene. So a matter of minutes, and I can't, 3, 7, 15, I don't know, but probably not, a half an hour.
The injury specifically to D'Ebony's heart, would that have caused her to be conscious or unconscious any quicker?
She'd be conscious with these, but that probably makes it closer to just a handful of minutes because the heart is going to pump out blood under pressure. But there's no significant injury to the brain, so she would be conscious until she lost enough blood that she passed out.
And Dr. Deering, at the conclusion of the autopsy of Miss D'Ebony Lachey Groves, what was the cause and manner of death that you determined?
In my opinion, the cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds to the torso, probably a rifle, and the manner of death was homicide.
Thank you, Dr. Deering. I don't have any other questions.
Well, thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Deering.
Good evening.
I'm only going to ask you a few questions about one of the cases, the Joe Perez Jr. case. You might want to pull that file. And specifically, I'm going to ask you some questions about the clothing that he had on when he came to your office. I don't know what all you have in your file, but that might help you get to a certain spot. So you had mentioned earlier that when a deceased is brought to your office, they're usually brought in what you referred to as a body bag, and if they had clothes on at the time that they were taken from the scene, they would be clothed, and then if they any kind of personal property might be put in the bag. Is that how it usually works?
Yes. Okay. And sometimes even what they're wrapped in, so on, can come with them.
Okay. And so when Mr. Perez's body arrived at your office, and you began to look at it, you noticed that he has clothes on and there was some items in the bag other than just his body. Is that correct?
Well, I've just listed in the autopsy what clothing that he had.
And in the autopsy, did you notice that there were 2 hats?
Yes.
That were found with him when he arrived at your office, correct?
Yes.
All right. And is it correct that one of them was a Navy hat?
I described a blue cap and a black cap.
Okay. And so one was black and then one, we'll call it blue, if that's what's in your notes, as opposed to Navy. And were they, do you remember them at all? Or do you have any pictures with you at all?
We take pictures of the clothing. I don't specifically remember the caps.
Okay. If I may, Your Honor, I'd like to pass up, I don't know if you want to.
Thank you. This is a photo of the clothing from this case. It has the autopsy number on a little ruler that's in this, so I know it's from this case. And it shows a shirt and shorts and jeans and shoes and socks and 2 caps.
Okay. And can you tell from the 2 caps which one you would call the blue one and which one you would call the black one?
The one on the left in this I would call the blue one, and the one on the right I would call black. I'd have to actually see the clothing to be sure, but that's what it looks in the photo.
Okay. And are both of them similar in nature, that they have the polo sign on the front?
Yes, it's a polo rider on a horse.
Okay. And do you recall that both caps had a 3 on the side of it? Do you recall that?
I can see that in the picture.
Okay.
They have a 3.
All right. Could you tell from, if you remember, which cap, the black or the blue, that Mr. Perez was wearing at the time of the incident?
Give me a moment just to review my photos. Maybe I can tell.
Okay.
I've got some just thumbnails. Yeah, and the view of taken out of the body bag, the cap's no longer on his head. So on these initial photos, there's neither cap is on his head.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Do you know whether or not if either cap had any blood on it?
I don't.
Okay. I'd like to first make the photo that he's looking at the next numbered exhibit, please.
Sorry about that. This one.
With all the clothing?
Yeah, it's a picture that has all the clothing with the 2 caps, with the polo and the number 3s on them. And then specifically, I'd like to hand him this one. Can you recognize what that is, Dr. Deering?
It's a close-up of one of the caps.
Okay, that'd be the black cap on the right.
It could be. I have to see both of them to tell, but it's dark.
Okay, but they both look similar. One's blue and one's black. Is that right?
Yes.
And that appears to be
other picture back too. That'll I can answer it better because I think the 3s are a little different in the caps.
Okay.
So, from this picture, yes, this appears to be a picture of what would be the black cap, or the one on the right.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'd like to make that the next numbered exhibit. Just 1 second. Those are my questions. Thank you, Dr. Deering.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Deering. Well, I don't know, is there any other cross? I'm sorry. No, thank you, Dr. Deering.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That wraps up the forensic pathologist's testimony. So we are going to watch the testimony for some psychologists tomorrow. So we'll touch on that tomorrow. Again, we'll be on at 1 p.m. EST. I super appreciate everyone hanging out today, as always. And I will see you guys tomorrow for our 1 p.m. EST stream. Have a fantastic day. Thank you, little Peppa. You as well.